Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today.
It was like 2 a.m. and there was a house fire, and this dude came running out this house completely engulfed in flames. And so I get there and there's this smoldering figure leaning against the fence. Anyway, when we're actually in the back, now it's illuminated, there's no smoke, there's no darkness, and I'm like, holy shit, like this dude's nose is completely burnt off, his fingers, his groin, like everything is gone. My only truth is that I can either make this place a little bit better or a little bit worse. That's all I know. Over and over again, this happens, and this is a problem. We're being divided because it stops us from looking the direction we all need to stand shoulder to shoulder and look and be like, why the fuck are you in this position? If your leader has divided you, they're not a leader.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. Hey folks, before we get into today's episode, just wanted to introduce you once again to our mobile application, Drillbook. Now, if you listen to the podcast, you're probably the sort of person that likes to develop themselves. Now, Drillbook is built to be the home of training ideas for drill grounds all across the world. It's a library of content built by firefighters for firefighters. It's for training ideas, it's for incident debriefs, radio messages. We've got if code templates in there, knots and lines, quick reference guides, interview questions, answers, and guidance. So go in there, check it out. You want to develop yourself. If you're looking to develop a firefighter on your station, head into the App Store or click the notes in the podcast links below. James, welcome to the podcast again, my friend. How are you?
Good, mate. Thank you so much for having me. And I want to hear a little bit in this conversation about some of your adventures. I know we don't have to go super deep, but last time we spoke, you had not been on the SAS show. You had not gone to do earthquake relief with your team, so I'm excited to see where this goes. You've done a lot of things since we spoke.
One of those conversations where I'm going to think of this a little bit like jiu-jitsu, because I imagine we're going to sneak around the back of each other consistently, and then one point the other one will turn around and go, "Hey, hang on a minute, I'm interviewing you. What the hell are you doing?" Because
I get nervous when dudes sneak behind me, so
I will be like, dude, yeah, and I'll have been speaking for like 4 minutes and go, God damn it, we've got questions for James. For people that are unfamiliar with you, give us a whistle stop tour. If they're not, they should be familiar with you because we've spoken God knows how much about Behind the Shield. But give people a whistle stop tour of maybe your first route into the emergency services, and obviously for people, even your listeners that won't know, your origins kind of from the UK to where you are now.
All right. Well, firstly, I apologize. I bought the world's squeakiest chair, which is the worst thing you can do as a podcaster. So if you hear like groaning in the background, that's my chair, not my butt. So very long story short, I grew up in Bath in a farm. My dad was a horse vet and had the most incredible childhood, being exposed to a number of different principles that I took through the rest of my career. Firstly, my dining room table, or the kitchen table, should I say, that my family would eat around so mirrors the firehouse table. It was amazing. So there was conversation and laughter and taking the piss out of each other, and it was beautiful. The people that walked through the farm doors could be anywhere from extended royalty to travelers and everyone in between. And so you also learned that money doesn't make you who you are. You are a good person or a bad person. And I watched my dad do a lot of pro bono work for some of the travelers and, people that bring in animals that got hit by a car. So I got to see, kindness and compassion. I also got to see a lot of blood and guts because my childhood was either, I'd go to school and be tired and I'd get, just told off by teachers, "Oh, you were probably watching TV." And I'm like, no, I was out lambing or
Yeah.
work operating on a horse. So it was an
Lambing was
amazing.
always one of those where you end up in a crap caravan that you've not bought because it works. You've bought just because you can put it close to the lambing and you just stay there for like 4 days sipping tea and not sleeping.
Yeah, no, lambing as in sheep giving birth to babies in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
We had when we were at a farm not so long ago, and again, the lady had just bought this old clapped out caravan, and they had it out with the lambing fields, and they'd sort of take it in shifts because you had to have somebody out there all the time with them. Because, like you say, if they struggle to deliver themselves, it can go very rough very quickly.
sorry, I misunderstood because there's a term glamming over here, which is like glamping. Oh, glamping it is, where it's
Oh,
like
glamping,
camping with
yeah,
those. I was getting confused. So yeah, no. So what would happen is, yeah, we'd be out there, we'd be watching them. Then one would be born that was close to death, so then you'd have to take it in the house and rub it with a towel. And then we had an Aga, those stoves that are always on, and
yeah.
basically like the plate warming one. You could put a lamb in there with the door open, and it would warm it up without cooking it. So so yeah, so I mean, all
They
these
were always
different.
a ball ache to clean. I had one of them in my first house, and they're absolutely beautiful, but they are such a ball ache to clean because it's all big cast iron, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's basically wire brush is what you're using. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're having to scrub everything. So yeah, but when I was young, um, ironically, and we'll talk about the book, I'd forgotten about this through my entire career as a firefighter, but I was almost killed in a house fire when I was 4. So I had that. Then we had a couple of fires on the farm where local firefighters came. We had a big hay barn that someone set fire to, and then my dad's horse hospital, his surgery, caught fire.
Oh, mate.
And so 2 different times we had firefighters come in there. So by the time I was a little bit older, I was kind of torn between the fire service and medicine. But when I was in secondary school, we had those annual health checks, and I was told I was colorblind. They showed me that little book with the numbers, and they were like, "You can
No.
never be a pilot, you can never be a firefighter." And I'm like, "Well, shit, that's what I wanted to do." So I ended up going down the medical route, started my A levels, realized I was just not, educationally sound to become a doctor the way that the route is set out,
Yeah.
and just fumbled around for a long time. So ended up finding myself in the world of stunts, became a stunt man, was working in Japan for Universal Studios, met an American girl, we got married, and then moved to America. But I don't know why, but right before I got on the plane, I found a copy of Muscle and Fitness, or bought a couple of Muscle and Fitness, and in there was a Miami-Dade firefighter, and it was talking about what they do. And I was like, oh shit, they're paramedics and they're firefighters in America. And so I just had this kind of aha moment, like, what are they talking about? It took me like 10 years to realize this. I'm not the sharpest tool in the box, but um, I can see colors. It may not be these slight changes. I'd probably be a terrible fashion designer, but I can see colors. So anyway, I ended up going to this fire academy that happened to be like 3 miles down the road from where I lived in Orlando, and did the medical and told the doctor like, "Hey, your book, I can see some of it, not all of it, but you name anything in this room, I'll tell you what color it is." And that was it. So that's all it took to actually get on the road. And obviously, I guess destiny. I wasn't supposed to be a British firefighter, but I ended up, yeah, joining the fire service and then becoming a paramedic as well. So spent 14 years on the east and west coast here in the US.
I'm going to zoom back in that because I'm learning from you. People don't know. Like I spoke to you first time a few years ago, and you've not even got onto Behind the Shield yet. We'll talk about that in a bit. But this is an enormous podcast over in the US. We'll put links so people can go and see it. But one of the things I did learn from James, everybody, is the ability not to interrupt and instead take notes. Because we've got everybody won't see the video, but we're talking over Zoom and whatnot. I get super excited when I hear James talking about things and how it relates to so many other stuff. And I've got into discipline of finally writing stuff down rather than interrupting you, which is first thing I wrote down: dining room table with the family. That is something I would love to speak about, just in terms of how that's changed over the years and how much of a character building, character correcting, but also like I was going to say for a second, then like learning to be a good man, which is actually probably the wrong thing to say, but just learning to be a good person. Those making eye contact, that learning the social cues, being around adults, being around different conversations. Now that we've seen the explosion of technology, certainly on a farm, but even for myself, my dad was a builder. There was a lot of this shit needs to be done before the end of the day. It was going out, emptying the vans after tea. It wasn't going and playing on PlayStations. It wasn't doing all that sort of stuff. And for yourself, it will have been, we need to go and fetch the horses. We need to go and sort the lambs out. You can do whatever you want to do after we've done all of this stuff. So if you can, talk to me about developing those characteristics from the dining room table and how you feel that has or hasn't changed in generations since.
I would say, I mean, there's so many things to pull from it, but ultimately the biggest takeaway from that dynamic in a house or a fire station is communication and the mental health element. So, you've had a bad day. Maybe my dad tried to save a mare and it passed away or whatever it was. You're able to eat together. I mean, there's even just think about the hierarchy and that, um, one works, we all work mentality. If my mum had cooked, then we all washed up. My dad
100%.
was working as a vet, so there was that too. And, I love that in earlier in my career where I'd literally physically have to wrestle my lieutenant from the sink because they'd be basically fucking with me to be like, oh, rookie doesn't want to wash up, and then you're
Yeah.
having to literally wrestle in the kitchen and get to the dishes and push everyone away. But that was it. It was having pride in the fact that you are part of this family, this tribe, this community.
Mm.
But what's really sad is I had that. Like I always hold Anaheim, which is my California department, as the pinnacle. I worked with some great human beings in other places, but overall, and we can get into that, like the way they hired, the way their probation was, all that stuff. They were, I would argue, one of the best fire departments when I worked there, at least, not because of me. Um, in the whole of the US. It really was. And I would argue I've worked for one of the worst ones as well. We can get into that too. But they did that so well. Like we shopped. I mean, we had all this food that we would buy for shifts and shifts and shifts, and we would plan meals and we would eat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. Now, obviously, calls come in, but that kitchen table was the nucleus. And what I've seen, and partly it's for a good reason, is a breakdown of this. Now, the the communal dorms have slowly turning into individual dorms for per
Yeah.
crew or whatever vehicle you're on. I think that's great because the fact that we wake up an entire fire station for one rig to go out is pure insanity. But
Mhm.
what that's also brought in is the ability to just go and hide in your bedroom now, which is very
Mate, we
negative.
have that with the like 24-hour 20 day crew plusing stations and stuff like that in the UK. You can come on shift and one person will obligatory come down and say hi, just give you the fob and like let you know what the crack is. And you cannot see people for 16 hours. You just wander around like it's a ghost town, like there's been some apocalypse or something like that. And
Yeah.
you just don't see people.
Yeah, and it's just that's so detrimental. So I think, what needs to happen by us, the actual firefighters, to be like, look, downtime is much needed. We're all overwhelmed, we're overstimulated in this profession, but let's all work out together or let's go, play volleyball or basketball or whatever, and let's eat together at this time. So you can go and do your own thing. You don't have to be like, with each other 24/7,
No, of course.
but pull yourself out at certain times to get around that dinner table again. And this is what was so heartbreaking with COVID. And thank God I'd actually transitioned out by that point because I was looking from the outside, looking in, going, what in the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Like, who's the puppeteer of this madness? And it was a real thing. Like, be very clear, it was a
Yeah,
real
yeah, yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I ended up getting a vaccine myself because I wanted to travel, and I didn't
Mhm.
think that was going to kill me either, to be honest. But the way it was handled was so poorly. And you're telling people in fire stations that have just seen horrible things, when you get back, you can't even be in the same room as each other. And
Yeah.
you took away the very coping mechanism they need because these men and women were the ones that were seeing the people that were dying from this and
Mm.
all the escalation of mental health problems and child abuse and everything that we saw mentally when you lock people in their buildings. So I think that's a long monologue to say that the value of camaraderie around a singular place,
Mm.
dining room table, kitchen table, whatever it is, cannot be, overstated. And that's why I think the people in the fire service of yesteryear probably did a better job in some areas because that was the center of the universe for them.
Yes.
As
I
we've
think they did. I
modernized,
think they did a lot of things very well. I think we've ended up sacrificing. It's strange because we still hold culture at the pinnacle of things for good and bad. Like some of the cultural reviews in the UK over the last 2 years have been harrowing and really, really upsetting and disappointing. I don't believe some of them are as true or accurate. I believe It's the small few of that have spoiled it for the rest. But I feel we have sacrificed the good parts of culture at the altar of efficiency, because it's hard to quantify what you speak about there, the value of the watch table, the value of those interactions, the value of disseminating and diluting that intensity, that trauma, that stress amongst a team through a variety of activities, whether that, whatever, it could just be a quiz, it could just be shooting the shit, it might be pool ping pong, it might be, volleyball, whatever it is. But the ability to dissipate that is something that's very intangible. It's hard to quantify. Do you know what I mean? So when we do talk about efficiencies and what are firefighters doing with all their time on stations, can you go and do more X? Can you do more risk assessments, more community work, more this, more that? Get out and do a thing that we can measure with a metric, because culture micro is very hard to measure. We try and do it macro with like cultural review questionnaires and like what's the Gallup? Gallup, the big international organization that does all of those engagement surveys. We measure that in the macro, but in the micro, it's hard to justify it. And I think those are the things, as you just articulated far better than my waffle, that get sacrificed. And then it's the repercussions that we say, oh God, mental health is really struggling, and we'll give you some trim, we'll give you some mental health first aiders, which are all fantastic things. I participate in both of them, but I don't think we still value in the same way, because it's hard, even for myself, as I waffle on now, to articulate why that. Well, we know why it's so important, but it's hard to put it on a graph. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Oh, I do. And this is so in America, just to educate the British audience,
Please.
the average work week is 56 hours a week. And we've devolved. Basically, we haven't moved with the times. Back in the day, we didn't do EMS, we were just firefighters. And, we really were. Our forefathers and foremothers, depending on how far back you go, were actually sitting around playing cards, smoking cigarettes, in some fire stations, drinking, and then waiting for an actual fire. Well, fast forward now, we're paramedics. We do all the vehicle extrication, and if it doesn't involve arresting someone, the rest is us. I've done snake removal. I've done all kinds of shit, stuff.
Yeah. We live at the bottom
And
of the hill. Yeah, the
yeah,
police catch some stuff on the way down, the paramedics catch some of it, and then we catch everything else.
exactly. So you have that, and we have this 56-hour work week. And one of the things that I see is the absolute nucleus of our physical and mental health problems that are killing us in droves. Like we've lost, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but in police and fire, we've lost more to suicide alone than what we used to refer to classically as line of duty deaths, which is
Yeah.
including heart attacks and other,
Well, I think in the
medical
UK, I
emergencies.
know of one line of duty death this year. It was in Scotland a couple of months ago, breathing apparatus incident. But I can think of two in mine and close to services who have taken their own lives in the last couple of months. And I'm live in a very small sphere of, myself biased. So I'm sure the numbers are far greater than that. But you hear of all the line of duty deaths. You don't hear tragically about those that have chosen to check out permanently.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the thing. So when we're talking about measurable, certainly in the US, they want us to do more with less. And a perfect example, I was actually in London the end of last year and got to meet Ruth, who was, one of the heads of the Firefighters charity,
Yeah.
and went to the Google headquarters in London. I think it was
Amazing.
near was it King's Cross? I think it was.
Yeah.
And we stood on the roof, and I met one of the London Fire Brigade's, pretty respected senior officers there. And I told him, hey, when we were walking earlier, I passed what looked like a fire station. Now it's this Ponzi restaurant. And I showed him the picture, and he's like, yeah, that was closed a few years ago. And I'm
Yeah.
like, this is the problem, is this is happening in the UK, it's happening in the US. They keep saying, oh, you need to be busier, busier, busier. Well, firstly, especially if you throw in EMS, like here, we're, like I said, paramedics and firefighters, we're running our asses off
Oh,
24 hours
mate.
a day.
Yeah.
But if you kind of flip it around, you take whatever your favorite football team is,
Mm-hmm.
see how many hours of busy work those men, or if it's the Lionesses, those women are required to do. They're going to train hard. They're going to have rest and recovery. They're investing in their people. So when it matters on
And
game
we
day,
pay them to come and tell us about team culture and how it's done so well. And they've got some wonderful acronyms, and I love them. And you and I have read the books, but it's this bit here that we're not giving the time to. We think I'll just give you a 15-minute motivational speak, and then you go and culture will improve. No, it's all the intangibles. It's where it's the iceberg underneath that we're not doing, or we
Yeah,
used to do.
exactly. So you have to invest in your people. And if you look, and I believe it was pretty well broadcast in the UK, there's a lot of businesses that tried a 4-day work week. And we're
Mm,
talking outside the fire service now. It's just
mm,
regular corporate offices. And they were like, oh, they were not adding like longer days in those 4 days. It's still 4 8-hour days instead of 5 8-hour days.
mm.
And they realized that they got the same, sometimes more done because, as you know, if you're in an office job, you're kind of like, well, the inbox is never empty, so you just
No,
kind of pace yourself for that day. Well, now they were like, we got the same amount done. These people get to spend an extra day with their family, and
yeah,
then now they're 3 days rested when they come back. So the private sector is getting this. Google is basically, as long as you're getting your work done, we're going to leave you alone. You can come in whenever you want. And yet the fire service, we're saying, oh, Pete, there was an hour where you weren't running a call. So why don't
yeah.
you get out and check some hydrants or whatever? When would you ever tell a security guard in, a block of flats, oh, Steve, you haven't chased a bad guy, so, go and do this.
Can
They're
you just
there.
walk aimlessly around the building, please, and scanning your card on every floor for no apparent reason?
Exactly. So they're there because we want them to be ready when shit hits the fan. It's the
Yeah.
same with the fire service. We don't need to be doing more busy work. We need to be doing rest and recovery when needed, and then training and fitness standards. So,
Mm.
okay, actually take that hour and get with your crew and go do, combat challenge or whatever it is that you choose to do to get
Yeah.
yourself ready, because that way we're investing that time and it's doing something productive. But, going to do yet another educational thing in a school
Mm.
is not going to make you ready to climb X amount of stairs in Grenfell Tower. And
No,
that's what we're actually paid to do. And people miss that. You shouldn't make firefighters, they shouldn't have to justify what they're doing, because when
that's the
you put
word.
three
Yeah.
numbers, they show up, you know exactly what they do. But we're
Mm.
not supposed to be running 24/7. Otherwise, we burn out, we get fat, we have heart issues, we have strokes, we get addictions, and we take our own lives.
Mate, it was Tyrone Hurst. You know who he is fire department humor. I
I
forget.
I don't actually. I'll write his name down.
You put him on your list. You love him. Tyrone's a firefighter from Southern California, and he runs an Instagram page, Fire Department Humor, and it's all about that gallows humor. He's absolutely hilarious. You will love him, mate. Go and check him out on Instagram after this. Everybody go and have a look at him. Anyway, we had him on the podcast a little while ago, and he was saying that they're running something like 11,000 calls. I forget whether that was per week or whatever, but it was kind of the origin of why he started the page, just to try and bring that levity and that injection of humor back into the department. And it's all based around stereotypes in the department and the old hand and the rookie. And there's a number of people that do very similar stuff out there. They're all wonderful. But Tyrone especially utilized what he had to try and, recorrect some of the balance, because the culture that he was seeing was rapidly deteriorating because of the sheer volume of work that people were being asked to do, and us not truly valuing giving that downtime to people. But he was a fantastic sort of example of it. Something else I wrote down there, and I'd be remiss if we skim past it. Stuck in a house fire when you were a child. Was this with your granddad?
Yes, it is. And what's funny is that the
See, I told you I
entire
read the
time
book.
you did. And the whole time that I was a firefighter, I'd forgotten about it. When we talk about trauma being locked away, obviously that wasn't even something that haunted me, because I ended up going, I want more fire in my life. So clearly it wasn't, it was processed in a healthy way, but it was still locked away. And it was
Mm.
only when I sat down right at the beginning of COVID and took all these blog posts that I'd made for the last few years and said, okay, how can I kind of make this more into an actual book that people could, have each chapter is a short story from my life, but there's a takeaway from, mental health, physical health, overcoming injury, all these things, fitness. And so, yeah, and it's amazing. You start writing and all of a sudden these doors start opening. And this had also happened when I got off shift. So I was transitioned out of the fire service. So I was sleeping in my own bed every night. And
Mm.
even now, like, my brain is still unlocking. It's crazy. So
we
we were
were
talking before
saying
we hit
this before we
record.
came on. Like, I've still got that fog, even though I've been in a different department now, in the training department. I've still got that fogginess, like you're trying to look into a mirror, but it's really dirty. and you can't see the stuff. Like, people won't know, and we'll just go there for a second. So Behind the Shield is up to 770, 80 something episodes now, but your memory recall, even though you're a little bit older than me, is strong. And, you keep telling me mine's going to get better, but I'm hopeful it will, because I struggle to pull these names and these experiences out of my head. But take us back to how old were you? 4 years old?
Yes, yeah. So I was my grandparents lived in a place called Melksham, which is near, again, the West Country. And the way it goes, basically, my granddad was making us, I think, sausage and chips or something, or egg and chips, I think it
Good
was.
man.
And back in the day when you literally just put a pot of oil on the cooker, and I think, well, I say I think I wrote about it, so I know. We were watching cartoons, and he said it's almost ready, and we were like, "Hey, can we just we finish this cartoon, and then can we eat?" And because he was just an amazing bloke, he was like, "Yeah, that's fine." But he went to turn it down, and he turned it up by mistake. He was a piano player, so I think he went back and played his piano. Actually, no, he didn't. The piano was in the lounge, so he would have gone back to his office anyway. So he was 2 rooms away from the kitchen, actually 3 rooms. And so we're watching there. All of a sudden, there's an explosion. It's one of those doors that has all the glass panels in it. And yeah, the next thing, my sister is trying to get us out, and initially the door wouldn't open, and she's trying to find my granddad, and she goes up, calls my mum, and then but is back in the day with no answer phone, so she doesn't pick up. She goes back down, and she's 8. My sister manages to get the door open, and it's billowing with smoke, and because I know they told me that when they found us, we were all like black.
Mm.
And then she got us out, and it's interesting because my granddad at some point got out as well. I think maybe even after us, but he just started gardening. And I wrote in the book, he was a World War II veteran on the Orkney Islands and shot down the first German bomber, his
Wow.
team. And so I don't know how much you saw when you were on that kind of crew in the Orkney Islands, but if they saw that plane and he's got that German pilot, mangled in his mind, who knows? So anyway, he went into full on shock. So, he didn't even look for us, realize we were in nothing of that. He just went full in. So it was really interesting. But yeah, it was a
But he
pretty,
tortured himself about that as well, bless him.
maybe. I mean, he lived to be almost 100. So I
Man.
didn't. I think it was my grandmother tortured him more than anything else.
They
But
got out, they're fine.
so yeah. So anyway, that was such a crazy thing because, as you said, years later I became a firefighter, and my whole career, I never even thought about that. By that point, it was already gone. But clearly, that was the driving force of so many of us that have, unbeknownst to us, a lot of us in uniform have childhood trauma. It might be more benign, like I did. No one was actually trying to kill me, or like so many of the guests, sexual assault and, growing up around addiction and violence and being fostered or being abandoned by a parent. A lot of these create vulnerability in that child. And then we want to be that superhero. We want to stop people from hurting. And we kind of want to burrow down our own shit and just put armor around it. So it's really interesting now with this lens, almost, as you said, almost 800 episodes now. We focus so much on, well, Pete's struggling because he was at Grenfell or whatever, that car accident, and no one mentions, no one thinks, well, what happened to Pete
Mm.
for those 20-25 years before he put the uniform on? That
Yeah.
is our most formative time. That's when the foundation is either strong or not. And you can have trauma and heal from it, like process it naturally, and it becomes a strength. I'm all about post-traumatic growth, but if
Mm.
we burrow it down, I think that's the kind of why behind some of these stories where we have a person who's in the military or a firefighter for only 6 months, and then they take their own life or they overdose because we
That could have
keep
gone very
forgetting.
differently. The message that you took away from that was that I survived and my family survived and we went through a challenging thing. Some people could have taken the story. It's the story you tell yourself after, isn't it? Oh, my sister had to rescue me and I'm not enough of a man. Somebody could have walked away with that story, or my family didn't care about me and I nearly died. But the story that you take away from that must have started to lead you down that, because even before the fire service, you went on, you started doing the lifeguarding, and talk to me about becoming a stuntman as well, because I've got this image in my head. We used to go to a local farm when I was a kid, and we used to do backflips off the hay bales. And I did that right up until the day when there was a broken pallet in the hay bales and I got a nail through my ankle. So we never did it again after that. But farms can be crazy places to grow up on. So where did the whole drive for lifeguarding and stuntman? Because you're obviously heading down that action packed sort of route before you ever had that fire service mentality in there.
So I was a very meek child, very small stature. I didn't have my growth spurt till I was 18. Everyone else had, Adam's apples and mustaches, and I was like, "Hello, I'm James Geering." Um, and so, I
That's
always,
why you developed the communication tool, though. Maybe I don't know
well, I tell you one thing,
the
it's
humor and the
certainly where I
communication.
got my wit, yeah, because
Yeah,
I'm not saying I'm super funny, but I would be able to make better jokes about myself than anyone else can, and that was
yeah.
100% a coping mechanism. But I think there was also that vulnerability, and I used to have the worst night terrors. Like my family would come up and I was in the attic, so the eaves would be over the bed, and I'd wake up, my knuckles are bleeding, and there's plaster all over, and I've been punching the walls, and like
Oh,
really, really bad. One time they had to put bars on my window when I was younger because I was halfway out the window on the third floor. So bad, pretty bad stuff. So clearly there was and I'll be very transparent. I wet the bed till I was 11
32.
or 12.
Sorry.
No, but that's almost, it's,
Oh man,
by the time you're a teen, that's
common though.
fucking so embarrassing.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
fuck
So
yeah. You start going around people's houses for some unknown reason when you go on a sleepover. All the lads want to talk about that, and I'm like, no, I'm not. Not we on about what kind of sleepover is this? I'm not showing you the fact I haven't got pubes. What are we doing here?
exactly. This wasn't on the invitation.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that's what's interesting is obviously there was trauma there. You put those together now in psychology, like, okay, well, clearly, we're still dealing with that stuff. And I think if there are ghosts, by the way, my house was the most haunted place I've ever been in my entire life. And when I learned why my friends would never want to sleep over because they used to hear that stuff too. So this was by Box Tunnel. So when they built that, it was the first time I'd ever built. I think it was either half a mile or a mile through the hill. So it'd never been done before. And I think tens, if not hundreds of people were killed in collapses and everything. And they were probably bringing them all to my house. So, back in the
You
day,
dare each other to get down it.
um, to the tunnel, no, 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 no. It was active trains
Oh,
all the
right.
time.
Sorry.
But I mean, the bodies would have been brought, that yeah, they would have died in my farmhouse because it was several hundred years old. So,
We used to
um,
dare each other to go and do little sleepovers in the court in the graveyard. That was a stupid idea, you know what I mean? But to go there for a second, also in all seriousness, through your life as a first responder as well, what happens when we die? And this is maybe a bit of a heavy thing to jump straight into, but just because that connection is there, and I always think people that have worked in the first responder community, because something happens, and I don't know what you've placed after the thing, because I don't know, I know you have because we've spoken before, but like when you actually see somebody's life end, it does very much look like you don't necessarily see something leave, but something changes. Something is no longer there that was there before. And you do or I personally feel like I then see that thing as a shell because the character and everything that was about them before has left. It feels like it's gone somewhere, but I don't know where.
yeah, I think the best way of illustrating that, I believe that there has to be more than this. I don't believe that there was a brother and sister in a garden and then he pulled out one of his ribs and then they ate an
Yeah.
apple and all that stuff. I don't believe
Good
that
story
personally.
though.
Yeah, each to
Gross.
their own, but I don't think
Wish I'd
that's
have
the
written it.
origin story. But then I
Oh,
also don't
loads.
believe completely in the whole chaos that there was just a star and it exploded and then just by chance we have this existence. I'm sorry, but I do believe there's more. And I remember listening to Deepak Chopra, who's obviously a spiritual guru, but he's also a doctor, and he was saying that in 3 years every single cell in the human body has regenerated, but we always still have that same consciousness. And to me, that's my belief. Like, okay, there's something more. I really do believe that. But and I wrote about this in the book. I had a call and it was my last shift, and the gods were not happy because they threw all kinds of shit at me. And so many people died that day. But one of them was like 2 in the morning, and there was a house fire, and this dude came running out this house completely engulfed in flames, and the crew, two paramedics had actually gone to the back of the house. All the other, the engines and truck were in the front, and they had radioed, "Hey, we need help." So we're all tearing up towards the fire, most of the flame, and I'm like, "Hey, they're in the back. We're gonna go get these guys out. We were on a rescue as well, which is the ambulance with the fire gear on it.
Mm.
And so I get there, and there's this smoldering figure leaning against the fence. I run over with my fellow, the paramedic from the other rig, and it's hard to see him at first. You can tell he's very badly burnt, but we get a backboard, get him over the fence, get him on the stretcher, and then we get into my rig. So he comes as another paramedic with me, I think it was. Anyway, when we're actually in the back, now it's illuminated. There's no smoke, there's no darkness, and I'm like, holy shit! Like this dude's nose is completely burnt off, his fingers, his groin, like everything is gone. The only thing that wasn't basically third degree burns was the soles of his feet. And at this point, he's just standing there. We're just moving this body around, and I'm getting ready to intubate, which is put the tube down his throat. And my partner just asked him a question. I'm literally there with the blade and the tube in my hand, and he answers plain as day. His lips are gone, his tongue is gone, and he answers like we're talking now.
Yeah.
And it was mind blowing. So in the end, we switched like, okay, well, I guess I'm not intubating them. It's what normally do, protect the airway, but
Yeah.
we didn't have the ability to where I trained to be a paramedic. We had the drugs to actually paralyze them, make them
Mm.
unconscious, and then we intubate. We didn't have that, so but this guy was talking. So when I walked in, we pushed him in the hospital with just this mask over his face. They were like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "Watch." And then they asked him, and and they were just like gobsmacked. But that I wrote about this in the book for a reason. That was basically the one. And there's another time where this is the biggest one where I saw anatomically that was physically impossible
Yeah.
to breathe, to make sounds, to do any of that stuff. And it was like the spirit didn't know the body was dead. And I will never, ever forget that. And he died like an hour later. He was so badly
Yeah.
burned, but he was literally
That's it,
talking
isn't
like
it?
us.
Because everything's gone past the nerve endings at that point, and it's almost the person. It's almost like they're at the door about to leave, and they've gone through this traumatic thing, exiting the house. But when they're at the door, they're fine. But they are going. They're going to go any second now, but they seem fine. I
Yeah.
remember somebody recalling a very, very similar aspect to that. And when they get to that point, there's almost a very strange calmness. When you were talking there about energy and transfer, it made me think about like you say, the regeneration of cells. I think an easy analogy for me is we know transfer of energy exists. We know when we shout, it will carry to a certain extent and then it will dissipate and you won't be able to hear it anymore. I mean, even like for firefighters, you use a thermal imaging camera. You can, if I sit down somewhere and get up, you will see that part of my energy, for want of a better description, is transferred into that thing. I've left a part of me behind and that will dissipate and it will die. Not die, but it won't die. It will just transition again. They always say you can't destroy energy, can you? It just moves, it just changes in form.
Yeah.
But a part of me as well worries that if we go too far down that rabbit hole and we do convince ourselves too strongly, because I think something is beyond this, but I don't think your consciousness will follow it. So it's like if you turned up to the pearly gates and they go, and you go, "Oh, is this heaven?" And they go, "No, no, you were just there. This the end of it." And that's my concern, is that maybe something goes on, but I don't know if you're going to be there with it. So
Yeah.
maybe our consciousness won't follow. I don't know, and that's why, even despite having been through everything and in a similar way but different to yourself, I still don't have a good enough answer. Is probably clear by my response, but I believe that the energy goes somewhere, and again, you see that when somebody leaves us.
My only truth is that I can either make this place a little bit better or a little bit worse. That's all I know. Like I know that if I invest in my child, there's a greater chance of him becoming a kind and compassionate human being that hopefully will make this world a little better.
Mm.
Thinking about, if I die, I'm going to this place. I think sadly, especially in America, it's a very, there's a lot of Christians here, and there's a huge amount of obesity here. And it's sad to me because if you're telling someone, well, don't worry, God has a plan, wait till you get to heaven. And now you die at 47 years old with my ugly mug looking at you and I'm pounding on your chest and sticking tubes down your throat.
Mm.
You've missed life.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
imagine if you live an amazing life here and then you get somewhere and like, oh my God, this is even better,
Mm-hmm.
unlimited,
100%.
coffee and,
Yeah, yeah. If you just say God has a plan for me, you're almost sidestepping all that self accountability. But
yeah,
I also think of it in another few ways. It's like, imagine you get there and you are 42 and you go, "Oh, it's okay because there's a plan." And you turn up and he goes, hey, what's the plan for me? And he looks around and he goes, let's see what I gave you and let's see what you've done with it. Oh God, you've not looked after that very well, have you? You've really fucked that up. I'm not going to give you another one because you clearly didn't look after the one I gave you first time. Do you know what I mean? But if you get there, and I want to rock up there, and he goes, "Wow," or she, "You've used this to the max. Look, I mean, I can't reuse this shell. You've absolutely maxed it out. You've really tanked it. I'll tell you what. Here's a brand new one. Go and enjoy it again." But there's also the I think it was from an old I think it was not Zig Ziglar. Who was one of the other old motivational speakers? Jim Rohn, I think it was, where he talks about. You heard the story about the guy with the garden when the preacher comes along.
That remind me, I don't think so.
The preacher comes along country lane, comes across a guy with a beautiful garden, and he feels like he has to tell him. So he calls him over, sir, sir, sir. And he says, the Lord has blessed your garden. Look at what he's given you, the plants and the sunlight and the rain. And the guy goes, oh, well, thank you very much for the compliment, but with all due respect, you should have seen what it was like when God had it all to himself. It's about what you do with the thing you're given.
With the
We're all given
gift,
a life,
exactly.
we're all given a body, we're all given a lifetime in which to use it, but no one's going to do it for you. It's nice if someone else has a plan for you, but let's assume they don't, because you're just going to fit into somebody else's plan. And most of the time, they've not got anything planned for you. It's down to you to do what you can with the things you've been given.
Yeah. I mean, perfect example, and this is something I talked about a lot during the pandemic, the middle, of any two extremists is actually where the truth is, the normal people that stand in the middle.
Mm.
People were told that they closed the beaches, closed the parks, closed the gyms, told friends and family not to be around each other, but said, stay in your home, we'll send alcohol and fast food, and you can binge on Netflix.
Fuck.
So with the accountability thing, it's we also have to factor in that it's your environment as well. If you're a
Yes.
firefighter running 24 hours a day, working 56 hours a week, that is a part of why you're struggling physically, you're struggling mentally. So ownership, yeah. I mean, Jocko Willink and all these, these books, absolutely true. But you've also got to factor in the environment. So you have to advocate not only for yourself, but push against, like something I talk about a lot is prohibition of drugs. It's
Mm-hmm.
done nothing but cause so much death and destruction. I've witnessed it in America, especially. There wouldn't be gangs if you couldn't make a shitload of money off drugs. There wouldn't be problems at the borders, if people weren't fleeing from Mexico because their places of home has become so dangerous now. There wouldn't be as much prostitution, as much homelessness, all these, and certainly obviously the addiction itself. You put the addict back in the hands of the mental health professional through addiction counseling and et cetera, et cetera. So to say, oh, why does this addict, let's just stop giving him Narcan because he's just a drain on society. Well, yeah, there's ownership, but there's also environment.
Yeah.
If what you've done is told an addict, if you ask for help, we're going to arrest you,
Mm.
is that really setting you up for success? So this is the thing is, it's the ownership is part of the conversation, the environment is the other. And if we have those simultaneously,
Mm.
that's how we fix it.
Mm.
You don't take away all knives and say you fix the knife violence problem in the UK. You got to
Yeah.
talk about why are these kids slash each other with machetes in the first place.
100%. Have you ever spoke to Matt Chan? I bet you've had him on before, haven't you?
Yeah, he's been on, I think, twice now. We actually did one not too long ago. It was around the pandemic again, because I was putting out, that's when I went from 2 to 3 episodes, because I was so sick and tired of such awful information being put out. I'm like, let
Yeah.
me get real experts. And obviously, Matt's a firefighter, he's an elite athlete as well. So yeah, he's
He's also
amazing.
very open to the use of different medications and utilizing drugs, for want of a better description, for all of their health benefits, whereas we tend to just plaster them as a problem, and then you just said that, forcing them underground for nefarious means where they get mixed up and actually enlarge the problem, for want of a better description.
Well, it's crazy as well because I'm seeing so much success now with MDMA-led counseling, with
Yeah.
psychedelics, with ibogaine,
Mm.
with 5-MeO DMT, all these things that are quote unquote illegal, that the men and women in uniform that are either protecting the communities in the UK or are fighting overseas for that country, they have to go to a different country to get help because of our ridiculous prohibition laws.
Mm.
And you look at, I
Mate,
just
we're
had
so far behind you though. We're even worse. You know
yeah,
that from growing from the UK itself. We're just mired down in the quagmire of politics and fear. We'll be 10, 15 years behind you probably.
yeah. Well, I'm hoping that, if America tends to, influence a lot of other countries. And that's the thing.
100%. Yeah.
Prohibition came from the US and they actually put pressure on the UK and Australia to follow their model, almost
Mm.
shame them into why you're not doing this.
Yeah.
But there's so much success. And is it going to fix everyone? No. And this is why the mental health thing has to be a toolbox.
Mm.
What works for me really well is my dog, canine therapy. She's not a specific therapy dog. I just grew up on a farm. Animals are definitely a healing part
I
for me.
overdose on that as well as the typical addict. I've not told you since we last spoke. So we've got a 10 month. We had two dogs until beginning of last year when the second one passed, unfortunately, and now we've got a 10 month old German Shepherd and two 11 week old Springer Spaniels, as well as the three horses that we've got. I'm just trying to main vein that animal therapy as much as I can because it's so good, and they're just it's unrelented love and support and just such intuitive, and that's why like for guide dogs and other things like that, they're just so intuitive because their emotional intelligence is colossal.
Yeah. I just had a guest, Paige Figgy, on, and speaking of plant medicine, so I've been a user of
Yes,
CBD
episode
for a few years.
765. I saw her. She was great.
She was amazing. And so her daughter Charlotte was basically she was born to a twin. So her and her, I think it was sister, if I got that right. And then a few weeks into her life, she starts having these seizures and it gets worse and worse and worse to the point where when she's 4 years old, she's basically on life support because she's having two seizures an hour. Each one is lasting 29 minutes.
Mm.
So just when she's
Revett syndrome, isn't
post-ictal,
it? Yeah, I
yes.
remember. I was reading about her earlier.
Yeah, amazing. So anyway, she's done all these so-called experimental drugs, all these benzos, everything that, you would give seizure patients, but I've seen not work as a paramedic for 14 years. Um, and then she kind of leading up to that has obviously been looking for any other alternative therapies, and she finds a company that was able to purify CBD from the hemp plant. So again, not marijuana, hemp, the one that you grow, that you can make paper, that you can make clothes, etc. And puts it in a pore, and immediately she stops seizing.
Mm.
And Charlotte goes from life support, basically, I say life support, like palliative care, like
Yeah,
hospice. She's dying any day
yeah.
now. And then she lives 9 years. And she's still got this syndrome. And ultimately, she gets what they think is COVID. The seizures are sparked by high body temperature. She has, these unending seizures, and sadly, she passes away, at 13 years old. But 9 years, and the only thing that made a difference was CBD. And so
Mm.
this is another thing that's been vilified and called the weed and all this stuff. THC has an application. I think that is a great tool. But even in the first responder profession at the moment, when we have these drug tests and everyone's so afraid of the 0.3% THC that's in most hemp, which is like negligible, you can have zero THC CBD. And I've
Mm.
taken that. I've done numerous drug tests and it's never shown up because they're not testing for CBD. So as long
Mhm.
as there's no THC in there, but I've seen it with my aches and pains, with my wife's anxiety, with my son's wheezing, my dog's joint problems. It's incredible, and there's still so much demonizing. But the problem
Not
is,
only just that, mate, even in clothing and stuff like that, the sustainability, using it in building materials, the fiber of hemp is something that should be far more utilized. And I think as we start to see the relaxation, because like you say, if we played word association game, someone says hemp and they go, oh, cannabis, or they go, CBD or whatever it is. But the colossal usage just in cotton and silk and recycled polyester, the way it can be used with fabrics, I think the clothing industry will explode with hemp as well, not irrespective, but like in addition to all of the colossal health benefits from it. But it's been demonized solely through that association that it's been tarred with since, when we first saw it originate, probably in the 70s, when we started seeing, musicians and rappers and all that sort of stuff getting into it.
well, if you look at the actual origin story of prohibition that started in the US, it was after the complete failure of alcohol prohibition. And the reason that
Mm.
you and I know the name Al Capone is because of alcohol prohibition. Otherwise, he would have been a nothing.
Yeah.
So that's an epic failure. There's a guy, Harry Anslinger, that comes into the position next. And so alcohol prohibition is gone. So basically, he's just trying to justify his own job. He's the one behind Reefer Madness. He actually, there was a show on, I think it was Hulu, but um, I forget something about Billie Holiday. It was Johan Hari's story.
Yes.
And so they,
Was it the
basically
first one? Was it Finding the Scream that was his Johan Hari's
Chasing the Scream was the
Chasing the
first one.
Scream? Yeah, yeah.
Amazing
And
book.
then it
Yeah.
was Lost
Lost
Connection.
Connections.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he's got a new
Great
one,
books.
which
Have
I'm
you got
trying
another
to
one?
remember. Yeah. God, what the hell is it called?
I'll
It's
find it.
about social media. Yeah. If you Google his books, but it's really, I'm trying to get him back on, but he's, once he's written a book, he kind of goes
Stolen
dark again.
Focus. Yeah.
Stolen Focus.
Why
Yeah.
we can't
About
pay attention.
distractions and mental health and everything. Amazing again.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when you learn of the origin story, and then you watch the American gangs explode, and you watch the problems at the borders, and then as a firefighter paramedic in the US, you pull yellow sheets over 15-year-old gangbangers that have died over an apartment complex that their family rents.
Mm,
You see it firsthand. And
yeah.
it's just this epic failure. And now our police look like they're, going into Fallujah, just walking around the streets. And so we have to break that cycle. And then if you actually, again, make addiction, and this is not selling, this is not smuggling, those are criminals, but
Yeah, yeah.
addiction, if you put that in the hands of the medical system, it's supply and demand. Now
Mm,
the criminals aren't making money that way. There'll always be criminals, there'll always be people that do bad
of
shit,
course.
but the
Yeah.
number of them that would be swayed into nefarious, careers are probably going to find themselves going the right side of the tracks, especially if
And
you break
also,
the
what would be
cycle
the
of broken
long
homes.
cost of different criminal activity as well? Because the long cost of causing somebody to become addicted to a substance, even when that person, i.e., the criminal, stops engaging or is arrested or whatever, you're still left with a broken human who is now addicted to a substance that they will find other means for. You'd be astonished how, I know you wouldn't because you know, but most people would be astonished how resourceful an addict will become. And I say that as a recovered addict myself.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just it. It's that pain is pain, and people will look down their nose at let's say a crack user, or a meth user whilst they sip their wine and
Yeah.
scroll through social media. It's like that's your coping
Yeah.
mechanism. It just so
Yeah. I always
happens
say
that
to
yours
people, do
isn't
you use
legal.
drugs? No, no. But I thought I just saw you drink a coffee. Well, yeah, but
Hmm.
no, don't be silly. No, I'm not a drug. Okay, well, sorry. Do you ever drink out? Yeah. Well, and then you're like, stop fucking being so elitist. Do you know what I mean? And they live in the bubble of their own self denial. They don't realize they're in a cult. The edge of their cult is beyond their vision, so they don't even realize. It's like Truman Show. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're living in the bubble and they don't realize they're in the bubble. And I'm like,
Absolutely.
Jesus, it just frustrates me. But
Yeah. No, and I mean I drink alcohol, and I tell my wife, we have periods where we abstain for a while, and then, we will drink again, but and I don't binge drink, but I have never ever woken up in a morning and said, and then not drunk the night before and said, man, I wish I'd had a drink last night. But I've woken up lots of times wishing I hadn't had a drink last night. You know what I mean? So, is it, am
it's
I,
got its hooks in our social environment, though.
yeah,
It's so part of culture,
a
isn't it?
nice glass of wine, a nice beer. You know what I mean? We use the terms so beautifully. And even when you think about cocktails,
Mm.
alcohol tastes like shit. So we have to add fruit and sugar and, to
I
disguise
always
the
say to
fact that our
people, I'm
body
like,
doesn't want it.
what's the first drink you had? And they'll go, oh, it was this. My dad gave me some sherry on Christmas Day when I was a kid. I said, did you like it? No, it's fucking horrible. No, but you just persevered, didn't you? You just pushed on through. And you
Hmm.
got there through social pressure and expectation and wanting to fit in and everything like that. But you try and give somebody, athletic greens, or you try and introduce them something, they go, oh, it tastes like shit. Yeah, but the other thing tastes like shit. And the downside to it was very clear. There's I don't think there's anybody's going to debate the downside of alcohol. I think the science behind it is, undeniable now. But you try and give somebody the same science for a positive and then try and embed that habit, they'll push back hard, real hard.
Well, here's another like aha moment I had. Very long story, very short. A friend of mine, Chad, who's a firefighter here, and he actually was a Green Beret before, but
Wow.
he had a horrendous history of sexual trauma when he was a child. So he got into alcohol very young, kind of cleaned up to join the military. As soon as all the training was done and they were given more latitude, he slipped right back into drinking again. Ended up being dismissed from the military. Was an alcoholic for a while and then cleaned himself up and became a firefighter. and he hit the 10-year mark, which I think in a high op tempo station, you know, we're busy, so you run a lot of calls. Your learning curve is extremely steep
Yeah.
to the point where 10 years or so, I found this in myself too. Like you don't even call it a fire unless you've got to fight your way to the door. You don't call it a wreck unless you've got to do a clamshell and
Yeah.
all kinds of crazy shit to get to the person. And so, you're getting that kind of adrenal fatigue. And it's good. I mean, you're just getting better at what you do.
Mm.
But with that came that loss of distraction of the thing that he'd buried down. And so I ended up meeting him kind of at the beginning of his spiral down. I ended up being there pretty much with, I was in his house and he said, I'm going to go to addiction counseling one more time. If it doesn't work, I'm done, meaning he was going to stick a gun in his mouth. Thank God. And I hope that some of the things that I talked to him about, like understanding sleep deprivation and some, childhood trauma and some of these things, that he took that with him. And I
Mm.
hope that was at least a tiny part of, because it worked this last time. And that was amazing. And now he's been sober for 3 years, runs a thing called Recovery RX, which I'm actually wearing a shirt right now,
Good for him.
where they do a bunch of CrossFit workouts for people that are in recovery. But when I do recommend books at the end of the interview, he talked about this one called The Introvert's Edge, and I ended up getting that author on the show, and it was amazing because he said how you define an introvert or an extrovert is where do you get your energy? Where do you recharge? Now, for me,
Yeah.
I'm fine being in crowds, but I'm the kind of bloke at a party where, like, say it's a party in a bar next to a river. I'll end up going sitting by the river and
Yeah.
just, talking. Not at first, but at some point I'm like, I'm done. Or I'm the one at a party, you turn around like, where the fuck did James go? I just went home. And
Yeah.
so I'm fine with that, but I recharge in intimate settings, just with my son, my wife, walking my dog, whatever it is. An extrovert, true extrovert, actually gains energy from
Yeah.
that crowd. Some of the people that we see that are just so articulate and it works for them, but I think that's an absolute minority.
Mm.
So then when you go back to drinking and our culture and how we were raised as men, how often before you went out did you quote unquote pre-game, have a couple of drinks before you get to
Yeah.
the pub?
Hmm.
And so I think most of us have that social anxiety, and culturally it's been ingrained to us that it's okay to drink before you go and drink. And so the inability to stand in a room with a bunch of people stone cold sober was, we all have these anxieties. So we have
Yeah.
that when we're very, very young, and that becomes conditioned. But ultimately, you think about a more ancient tribe, you know, John the Pygmy is not the life of the party. They're all part of a community. You're not supposed to be the one that everyone's listening to and talking to and watching dance on tables.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
we
That was a
we
strange thing. We
drink,
just started holding court, didn't we, at some point in the ages, and we
yeah.
kind of adopted that approach to things and glorified those that could entertain and hold court in the middle and be the center of attention.
Exactly. So most of us that are like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I be like, Julian, who's always whatever? It's like Julian has the same thoughts as you, and the same as the fire service. I look at my crew and I'm like, why am I such a pussy? Why am I going through this? They're all doing fine. And they're looking at me going, why am I such a pussy? James
Yeah,
is doing fine, and
yeah.
this because we're all
Look at
have
his
this.
stoic face. In his
Yes,
mind, he's like, "I'm trying not to cry," but
exactly.
he's like, "God, look at him. He's just bulletproof."
Yeah, or I'm so damn tired, I feel like looking in a mirror that hasn't been cleaned, which is
Yes,
how,
the same.
like night and day compared to how I am now. But I just went on the transatlantic flight, and now the jet lag and not sleeping on the plane, it's set me back a
Mm.
little bit. So it's this constant undulation, but understanding that your personality makeup might be one of the reasons why you drink, and actually
Mm.
kind of looking inside at where do I get my energy from?
Yeah.
Do I have social anxiety? And that's not a negative. It's a normal thing
Mm.
to not, be. And I think with now, especially with so many devices in buildings, like that overstimulation, you walk in a casino, it's all lights and noises, or a nightclub or whatever. When you're young, it's amazing. But now, if I go to a restaurant, I don't want a fucking TV anywhere where I can see.
Yeah.
I want to just talk to my family. And it's so hard to find that now, Weatherspoons and all these places where it's just all crowds and noise. And
Mm.
that's not normal for a human being. And we got to kind of get back in touch with our, more ancient roots of how a human was designed to be.
That's where I think podcast has been the gift to introverts because there's almost a strange hypocrisy with podcasts because they assume people that run a podcast or like going on podcasts or whatever it might be are these tremendous extroverts. But it's kind of a trick because it's a very controlled environment, and you're almost when you get used to it, you'll know far better than me. But you're almost used to the fact that you don't think anybody's listening anyway. You're kind of speaking into the void because at the moment there's nobody there. There'll be somebody there at some point in time. But I have the same thing, like you said, about seeking those introvert spaces when I host the British Firefighter Challenge or the Cheshire or the Welsh Firefighter Challenge in a couple of weeks' time, and there's hundreds of people there or thousands of people there, and then after they've done the full day of do the thing, shout, cheer everybody on, and I'm there with the microphone all day, and they're like, let's all go out and let's go and do this and let's catch up with all our family. I just want to go and sit in the hotel room quietly with my wife and my daughter and just or go like 10 miles out of that city and just watch a movie, and I almost actively avoid those situations, and I'm sure that comes at a cost because it's a great networking opportunity and blah blah blah, but I know I won't be able to show up and do it again tomorrow if I don't cherish that selfish quiet time, that me time, because that's where I rejuvenate.
It's funny you say that because I had a lot of people go. We have FDIC here, which is the big national firefighters
It's on my
conference.
list. There's some amazing people there. Yeah.
Well, I've never been there, but here's
You
the
know.
thing. They're like, you should go there and you can do interviews. And I'm like, I have been to a lot of, there's one in Orlando Fire Conference. People are more pulled from a thousand directions and distracted than ever. So to
Yeah,
me, that's the worst place. I'd
mate.
much rather have like, network with you here
Yeah,
now for an
yeah,
hour
I
and a
know.
half than to be like, hey bro, how you doing? Hey
Did
bro,
you
how you
nearly do it
doing?
though? Because I've had that with the emergency services show in the UK, and they've offered me a few times of like, come and host a stage and an interview. So we'll like create some debates, and you can do some debate. And I very nearly went for it, and I was like, I'm not going to like that. That's not for me. And there will be such contrived, inauthentic, salesy conversations. I don't, and it will just be people, host a debate. What when everything's going to slag each other off, and I'm no, I very nearly did it though.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Firstly, I think they know that I swear too much to put me on a stage.
Yeah.
So, and it's not affected. It's just, it's the way I talk and I'm passionate. But yeah, but I've done what I'm gonna do with one of my friends. There's a couple of guys that I adore over here. They're just great human beings. One's been an amazing advocate, especially for firefighter cancer, and he himself just got over his own cancer. And then another one of mine who's very badly burnt in a fatal house fire. He lost one of his crew members in that backdraft, well not backdraft, the flashover. He is part of one in Canada, so I've told them I will come to yours because despite not wanting to be up on a stage, I love you guys too much so much that I'm going to do it anyway and get over my own shit. But what I've done in the past once, which I absolutely loved, is, and this is what I tell people now, I'm not going to get up there and present. I'm not an expert in anything, and I don't want to seem like I am. Have I pulled a lot of great wisdom from my guests? Absolutely. But what I like is doing a live podcast. So interviewing, like you would be on the stage with me, and people will be watching the whole thing live, and then emceeing a Q&A. That
Yeah.
is amazing because when you start the tumble, you start the ball rolling. It's tumbleweeds at first, is what I said, that word in my mind. And then you throw a couple questions out there. It is amazing. The floor opens up. And now people have watched you and I talk. And then you're saying, all right, now you come into the conversation. That is super, super engaging. But I mean, even like Jocko and all these, I can't listen to a podcast with someone monologues. It just
Yeah.
doesn't engage with me. We were talking
Yeah.
about Andrew Huberman. He's got some
Mm.
great stuff, but I just can't listen to be talked at for an hour. But I
I've
can listen to
really struggled
two
with it early.
humans
Really
talking.
struggled with it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's my favorite thing. So if, well, not if, when I go to do these ones later in the
When?
year,
Yes.
that will be that will be the dynamic. So not a debate because I hate the word debate because I've never seen
No.
anyone, gain from a debate. Oh, I won.
Being
Did
able to
you?
debate, I think we actually have lost the term because I debate with my family members all the time, and they're always lovely, engaging conversations. Most people can't debate. They're either talking or they're arguing.
Yeah.
But
I think
debate is the ability to walk away from it and respect each other's opinion afterwards and passionately discuss different perspectives and hopefully try and enlighten and educate each other. But most can't do that. It becomes an accusatory, salacious, aggressive argument. It's not a discussion or a debate.
yeah. And I would say, I don't even like the word debate at all because it still feels like I'm trying to get you to understand my thing. I just like conversation. Some
Yeah.
conversations are more charged than others, but it's still a conversation. I'm not going in going, I'm going to win. And that's what a debate is. Who's going to win the
Yeah.
debate? And I've had, I love Joe Rogan's podcast, but my least favorite episodes I listen to is when he's got two assholes arguing with each other.
Yeah.
Because just do two episodes with each person, let them talk to
Hmm.
you,
Yeah.
Joe, throw some devil's advocate stuff in, which is what he normally does. But you bring these two guests, oh, veganism is stupid, oh, carnivore,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, where you both agree that processed food sucks? Why don't you just stay there and actually take, parts of each of your field of knowledge and
Yeah.
add to the fact that there's actionable things in the middle where the Venn diagram actually meets.
Yeah. I think people like that don't actually have an opinion as such either. Because if you have an opinion, I always say to people like, what piece of information would cause you to change your opinion? And if they can't articulate any piece of information that would cause them to genuinely believe something different, then they don't have an opinion. They have almost like a religious belief, don't they? It's not based on any logic. If absolutely no piece of information would cause you to change it, then it's not an opinion. You've got this ideology in your mind that's just like it's like a religious belief, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, because you have facts too. If I said to you, Pete, these glasses are going to help your vision, and you're like, you're full of shit, James, and I say, just put them on. Oh, I can see better.
No,
That's
no,
all that needs to
that person
happen,
would refuse to even put them on.
Yeah, exactly.
They
So
would
if
refuse to
you
even be open to
you either
that.
have actionable things that you can bring to someone. I remember being taught a certain thing in paramedicine. One of my friends who came from the military, was a Marine corpsman, Navy corpsman for the Marines, and he was talking about, oh, you don't put oxygen on a stroke patient. I'm like, that's stupid. That's what they told us. And
Hmm.
then he said, look, James, let me show you. This is why. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm completely wrong.
Yeah,
That wasn't a debate. It was just the genesis, the evolution of medical thinking for that particular diagnosis. But I was so ingrained in the way I was taught, because I was actually freshly out of school by that point,
yeah.
that I'm like, no, it's what they told us. Put the oxygen on the stroke patient, and then you
I
learn about what it does to vasoconstriction or dilation and makes bleeding worse. And you're like, okay, now I understand it. That makes perfect sense. I'm actually going to stop doing that because you're right. So.
mm. We're going through a very similar thing in relation to road traffic collisions in the UK. I was on an instructor course recently, and we had a guy called Dr. Tim Nutbeam on the podcast a little while ago, and he's the lead on something called the Exit Project. And they were saying historically, I don't remember if you can remember that far back as well. It's when we first started doing formal extrications on casualties and the tools and everything started coming back, we came from a position of zero movement effectively. So, trying to isolate and get the spine in neutral alignment and just get the vehicle mobilized or stabilized, sorry, as quickly as possible. And then zero movement after that. Everything is done in a slow and precise manner. And the problem was more people were dying in vehicles. And when they look back through the genuine studies and they pulled all this information from all the fire and rescue services, they couldn't find any, post collision. I'll get this right. They couldn't find any post collision life changing injuries, i.e., you've moved their neck in the wrong way and that's caused a C spine fracture or something like that. There was none. They couldn't find anything. Yet so much of our procedures were built around reduced mobility, and something that we're bringing in has come out of the Exit Project is things like relocation and then expediting that extrication process, allowing that person where possible to almost self extricate. But obviously, if they're mechanically trapped, you can expedite the process by relocation of the vehicle, restructuring the vehicle, so using the rams to force things out of the vehicle, rather than always going for the C-spine immobilization, full roof removal, longboard out the back, very long process with many, many cuts versus a significantly more. But then when you say that to people that have always historically gone from massive stabilization, nobody gets in the vehicle too quickly, everything has to move slowly, I have to have someone with their hands on the head of the person, the entire incident, and it just dragged the whole thing out. But that is something that now when you walk out to stations, and unless you're able to show them the data, like where they've put the movement sensors on vehicles, and you can see the amount of movement that's involved, even in relocation, because it's done in a controlled manner. If you move the vehicle to a position where you can extricate quicker, the reduced movement for the actual person versus when you're like, if I'm holding your head and the vehicle moves slightly to the left or whatever, the fact that I'm holding your head and not allowing you to self-stabilize causes more damage than, because if you come to somebody with a broken arm, you'll have just seen it, they'll have already self-stabilized. They've already gotten themselves to a position where they're most comfortable. And we jump in there and try and manipulate them into a position they don't want to be in. Whereas just that whole mindset shift has been something that's really interesting when you see people have those eureka moments going onto stations.
So another thing that mirrors what you were saying about the injury from, movement, there
Mm-hmm.
is no science behind the backboard.
Yeah.
No one actually proved that strapping someone to a plastic board made anything positive. But I can tell you, as a paramedic who's taken, literally thousands of people out of, vehicles, homes, whatever, on backboards over 14 years,
Mm.
it makes everything worse. Like if you strap someone securely to a backboard and then you drive through the urban streets of American cities where people are cutting in front of you and no one's pulling over,
Mm-hmm.
the torso, as you said, is moving all over the place and the head is still stuck there.
And then if you
So,
put a neck
it's
collar on them as well, and you think you're doing a benefit, but you actually restrict their airflow because you're placing that restriction on their neck. I think we've gone away from neck collars altogether these days, and a lot of trucks don't carry them.
so the way that they're looking at here is they're getting away from boards, still with a collar, but now you'd be on the stretcher, with the back part like 45 degrees. So is it not Trelleborg? I forget the
You see
term now
Ken,
because
there's
um
Kendrick extrication devices, which are
no,
like,
no, but I'm talking about literally just sitting. Like you already got them out wherever
all
they were
right,
in. They've just got a C collar on. They're just sitting, half upright. There's
yeah,
a medical term, but we don't use it in my career, so I've forgotten what the textbook says. But um, so anyway, but that's what they do now. So they do have a neck collar because that does stop the head from flopping around. And if you have, torn kind of muscles and ligaments and
yeah,
things
yeah,
that are
yeah.
stabilizing the sore, I think it has an
But knowing that it's a
application.
tool in your box, not that it
Yeah,
has to be used every time. Like say, it's
exactly.
relevant and dependent on the injury,
Yeah,
rather than
and
it
you
just
ask
being
them,
to right quickly get the collar on. Well, why? Well, if yeah, well, as long as you're clear about your justification as to why you're putting it on, don't just have it as the go-to every time. Is just from my personal experience. It's like
well,
understand
even,
why you're using the tool, and we have this a lot with fire behavior as well. It's like we need to do this at every incident. Why? What's the property telling you? If the property's telling you this, okay, then do that. But don't just say we're always gonna go in and gas call 2BA, create an exit for whatever. Don't just have that as a template every time because that becomes very dangerous in a prescriptive manner when you're not really assessed in this example what the complexity of the casualties injuries are. Don't just do the same thing every time. It's the whole thing, same thing every time and expect a different result.
yeah. I mean, there's times where I've seen, for example, you've got this doesn't happen very often, obviously, but when there are people trapped under car, depending on the severity of their injury, even if you're a pretty well rehearsed crew, airbag use, for example, lifting a car is not something that we do all the time, and it does take a little bit of of time to set everything up and get all the
Mm-hmm.
gear off. And sometimes I think the answer is to just get three, of your strongest crew, put your
Yeah.
back to the car, pick the damn thing up, throw some cribbing under, and drag the person out because they're
Mm.
bleeding to death or getting crushed. And the same with car fires. Like I've always thought it's insanity that people get close to car fires. You're not saving anything. The moment there's a fire in a car, that car is being written off. Unless
Mm.
there's someone in there that you're trying to keep the flames away while you cut them out, that's a whole different story. But a car, an empty car, is a write off the moment it's on fire. And we
Yeah.
go there, we get really close, and then we just use water.
Mm.
Well, from me as and I'm not a fire instructor, I didn't get deep into the weeds with this. In Fire Academy, you learn, Class A fire is wood and paper, Class B is plastics and,
Mm.
oil-based products. Well, what is a car? It's a Class B fire on a metal frame. There's no paper on there, there's no wood. So that's why I love, and it nauseates me when people kind of belittle anything that isn't some heroic use of an action of a hose or a ladder.
Yeah.
But those blooming blankets, if they actually work,
Oh,
you
mate.
know,
Mm.
that or at least Class B foam on the fire, cover that thing in foam from, not it doesn't have to be like super far away, but don't get close enough where you could get, something exploding and taking out your knees
Yeah.
because you're not saving anything. It's a dumpster fire with wheels. But we act like, and I see it on Instagram, oh, I had a rip-in car fire. Like, oh wow, did
What
you
the
have a
fuck
rip-in
were you
trash
doing
can
near it?
fires?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, you put it out. But what heroic stuff did you do? Nothing. The heroic stuff is when you actually help, someone's home and pull
Yeah.
animals and people out and all that stuff. But a car fire is a metal frame with
Mm.
seats and rubber wheels and petrol that you just want to put out as soon as possible so it doesn't hurt someone else. You're
Hmm.
not saving anything. And
No.
so that whole, we chase it around with water. No one will put foam on it here. They'll get right up on it. And I did it myself. I'm not say they. That's how I was taught.
Yeah.
So I did it for a long time. But after a while, I'm like, why are we doing this? Like every single one goes away on the wrecker to be crushed and turned
Yeah.
into something else.
Yeah.
So, and then the same with the lifting. Sometimes forget the damn, 16 different safety steps. Sometimes you just gotta suck it up, pick
Mm.
that damn car off that person and drag them out.
Mm.
Yes, the airbags are great if you've got time, but if
Mm.
a car is sitting on a person's chest, if you've got cribbing, pick the side of the car up, throw the cribbing under so it doesn't slam back down on them again, and then get that person out.
We
So
went through because we looked at realistically how high you trying to lift it. We're just trying to lift it slightly off the person. So what we're talking, an inch. Yeah. So we just throw crib in and use hydraulic spreaders now because they'll lift
mhm.
the car easy enough. And literally, chocks go down, spreader goes in. You are talking 20 seconds. Chock the front wheels just in case it rolls forward. Chock the front wheels because the last thing you want to do is lift it up an inch and then see it drop forward on the face or something like that.
Yeah.
Just drop straight back down on them. But yeah, cribbing under the front wheels, just a block at the back, step chock, something like that. And then your spreader only needs to lift an inch. The thing with airbags is people that sometimes they're trying to lift them, 5-6 inches. You think they're just trying to get it off the person and drag them out. But we disappeared off down that rabbit hole there. I wanted to speak to you about when we were talking then. Sorry, I had EVs in my head because I've just been on an instructor course for electric vehicles and stuff like that, and that is something that is just storming its way already across America. I think they said there's something like 6.3 million electric vehicles in America now, and we obviously the distant cousin of America. We are catching up slowly and seeing the explosion of EV vehicles. And when we were talking there about hazards at road traffic collisions and stuff like that, it's really, really incredible to read about the reaction rate of the lithium ion batteries and when they start suppressing all this hydrogen sulfide, methane, and everything like that. And it's a massive concern for us over here because when you start having that initial reaction of seeing what you believe to be smoke emitting from the underside of a vehicle, that is a toxic gas. And very few people in the UK, when you go to a standard road traffic collision, if it's not involved in fire, will have anything like breathing apparatus on standby. But now, especially when like third division gate where you've got the public stood 10 feet away and they're downwind of this highly toxic, highly flammable, and there's a number of videos out there. But I didn't know if, and I know we might be going down another rabbit hole here. We'll lift out of it very quickly, I promise. But you're seeing a lot of those videos pop up on TikTok, Instagram, and stuff like that. Where do you see the explosion of that market? I mean, just from your sort of local conversations, because there's EV vehicles. I bet there's 10 on our street. We've both got an electric vehicle.
Yeah, I see. It's interesting because I don't own an electric vehicle and I pretty much got out the fire service without ever running on one. So I had a good class once. I can't remember if it was Anaheim or the next place I was at, and it was the hybrid. So it was
Hmm.
the kind of the electric motor, excuse me, yeah, the electric motor and the engine as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
And even then, all the wires, that ran up I think it was the A and B posts,
yeah,
you're like, oh my God, you think about extrication. Now you cut through
mhm,
that. That's
yeah.
not a good day. But what I am seeing, so I'll say, I know zero about fight and fire and
Yeah.
anything to
I'm
do with
only a
that
couple of steps
technology.
ahead, if that.
Yeah. But what I did see, and I think it was in the UK, if I'm not mistaken, maybe it was, I could have sworn it was that recently someone died in a house fire and there was actually a scooter
Yeah,
that they
it
had put
was.
against their door and they
There
died
was
in
a
that.
father that brought an electric scooter inside the house and had it on charge because, again, it's not just cars, scooters, wheelchairs, and they have these Faraday pouches where they're not letting any people carry certain objects onto subways, onto planes and stuff like that now because how volatile they are when they go into thermal runaway. And yeah, that video of the gentleman. There was another one. Was that the one where the guy jumped out? There was one where the guy jumped out the window. He was a non-UK resident, and it was a similar incident for him in a high-rise where a scooter had caught fire. Or we say catch fire. The battery had gone into thermal runaway, and it can happen so easily. What I didn't realize is, and this is one for you, literally right. Someone said this to me yesterday, really scared the hell out of me. So we'll bore people for a second about this, and we'll get back. Lithium ion batteries, they have a safety margin. So I didn't know. they charge between 3 volts and 4.5 or something like that. So 3 and 4.5. They never go over that, even though they can. You can overcharge a vehicle and you can let it run to the bottom. But they always say you should never let your battery run empty. Well, even your phone, when it's empty, it's not really empty. Because if you let lithium ion batteries run till they're empty, it disrupts the internal balance, basically, of them. And one thing that the government are really worried about at the minute, and I won't mention who it was, but they spoke to me about it over these past 2 days. If you wanted, we talk about cybercrime and stuff like that. If you wanted to cause some serious damage, you can get into these electric vehicles and just recalibrate the tolerance. You can do it in a garage. And if you have enough know-how, you could do it electronically as well. Where if you took the tolerance to 150% and you had these vehicles underneath a government building, or even if you just wanted to do it on somebody's street, or you wanted to go to the nearest high-rise car park, and you disrupted the tolerance of those vehicles and caused them all to overcharge, they will all go into thermal runaway. And the explosive environment that creates. So, like, I think it's in Germany and Australia, they don't allow electric vehicles in their high-rise blocks anymore because there was a place in I think it was China that lost something like 60 buses. There's a video on YouTube people can find, and then probably lots of people will have seen it on social media, where there's a line of buses. One of them goes into thermal runaway. They try and put it out with water, and it just catches the whole lot, and then it just cascades from there. And there was also a manufacturer in the UK lost 50 something million because the entire car dealership went up because they had an EV vehicle in there, but the insurance policy hadn't caught up with the developments in it, so they weren't insured to have EVs on site. So
Oh
the
God.
insurance company didn't pay up for it. But I know I'm going down a rabbit hole there, but I'm like, fucking hell, those last 2 days of input, and I was like, wow, yeah, that cybersecurity aspect is something that they're really worried about now, because you've got a portable bomb and they're everywhere. Do you know what I mean? And now with the innovations of self-driving and stuff like that, you can access them. You can dial into the vehicle. And I just think, wow, we are so behind the curve.
Yeah, I'd never heard that before. So you just educated me. But you think about, how small my son's got on the electric skateboards, really cool
Yeah.
thing. It's like 30 miles an hour. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But the battery in that is the size of what would it be? Like
They're pouch batteries,
an
they're like.
old,
Yeah.
red brick. Now that
Yeah.
kind of size at the
Yeah.
most. Now you think about how many of those red bricks would be in a car.
Mm.
If one of those batteries causes these fires that, we just talked about, people
Yeah.
jumping out windows, and I think the lady that I saw died, I think it was in the UK, was a black lady, older, and it was someone else's scooter that was in the hallway,
Okay.
and the fire was on the outside, and she was trapped. She died, I think. But so now you think the size of a car, or even something bigger, because there are electric trucks now.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, what is the fire load potential technically of that? If you put it in the right place under a combustible building, you could, literally spark another Grenfell.
Yeah. 100%, mate. That aspect really worries me. I wanted to take us on because I want to be conscious of time, but behind the shield. So talk to us about transitioning from first responder community. Well, obviously you're still part of the community as such, but from a professional capacity, going into that retirement, because you moved into retirement not inherently of your own volition. There was aspects to do with your health and whatnot, if memory calls.
Yeah, so actually, what it was, I mentioned about working for what I consider one of the best, which ironically protects Disneyland, but it's the city of Anaheim. So it's a city fire department. The park was built within the city. Obviously, it's an integral part of it, but their standards were amazing. They didn't have fitness standards because the men and women just worked out. The culture was that you didn't need
Yeah.
to have standards. And so very, very proud. They had a brutal probation where they would normally fire 25% of that recruit class by the end of the year because they set the bar high, and if you either made it or you didn't. So you had this real sense of pride. Conversely, the last place I worked, which there's a park on the other side of Florida, and they have their own fire department, I would argue was probably one of the worst. And it sounds like I'm bitter and talking crap, but it is what it is.
Hey, man.
Zero hiring standards, zero training at the front door, zero fitness standards, zero accountability, basically. And so I had gone from some incredible departments, find myself here, tearing my hair out, like, look, we're protecting, I would argue, the biggest target hazard on the planet.
Mm,
We need to be better.
mm,
Simple as that. And I spent 5 years really trying to make changes, and it would be off my own back. Right, I'll go I'll do all these classes. I'll drive from station to station. I'm bringing solutions to problems.
Mm.
And it was very much, at the front door, the interview, like, oh, how do you think you can help us make this department get better?
Yeah.
Like they ask all new people, and then you actually try and do it, and you're like, how about you just sit down and shut up? We don't want to hear it.
Mm.
So I had recovered. I was recovering from a meniscus tear. I tore my knee, and so got myself back to good health. And by this point, I'd started the podcast a couple of years prior, and the origin story of the podcast was 6 firefighter funerals in 2 years. And I was just so sick and tired of hearing bagpipes. They make me want to punch someone in the face now. And so I knew, coming from a background being a coach, an athlete, an exercise physiology graduate, that there were subject matter experts, as we talked about, that had, their life's work was fitness, nutrition, mental health, whatever. We in the fire service, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, tend to send someone on a weekend course and they come back as a fitness trainer or a
Yeah,
peer support expert. It's part of the chain, but you're not the guru. And so I wanted to get the gurus, who are the real movers and shakers. And so by this point, the podcast has been going a couple of years. And I said to my wife, I'm about to go back on shift. I've got myself back to, full duty. I've never claimed disability or anything like that. I always work my way back to where I need to be. The disability is there for certain people. I'm not looking down that at all.
Mm.
But I said to her, look, what do you think about if I just went all in on the podcast now? I've got, if I cash out my retirement, meaning today I have zero, by the way,
Mm.
I can give myself a salary for a year and a half and go all in on this thing and also walk the walk, because I'm talking to people, hey, the way that we're worked at the moment is killing us.
Mm.
Well, I'm going to step away because I don't, I see this in my mind. I see that, the brain fog and everything. I
Yeah.
can't think. I'm responsible for, searches and, drug
Mm.
calculations and pumping pressures and, belay lines and all these things. And I can barely remember if I'm supposed to turn left or right out the station on these calls. So
Yeah.
I'm going to walk the walk. And so I transitioned out, used my retirement right off the bat. So I had none now. And then very fortunate, right when the money was about to run out, it was either go back into a different department or what happened, which was some sponsorship for the podcast that allowed me to pay my mortgage, which was kind of good timing. But the kind of ethos behind that was, when I go on these calls, I sit on a rig, an engine, a rescue, whatever it is. I respond to one call at a time. As I'm sure it is in the UK, probably 20% of what we run on is actually an emergency.
Hmm.
So now, it's 80% of, what we call bullshit calls, basically,
Yeah.
that people, it's emergency to them. But if everyone was brought up to a level of
Just human
training and
proficiency.
self-rescue. Most of this, like, it didn't need to be a hospital. It could have been a
Yeah.
clinic. It could have been
Mm.
simply Googling the symptoms and realizing you're not dying, for example. But
Yeah.
whatever it was. So, but then I'm sitting and doing these podcasts, and thousands of people are listening to all these guests. So that was the big thing. The Green Berets have a term, the force multiplier. That particular
Yeah.
unit doesn't go and kick in doors. They can, but they train local forces to be able to kick in doors. So
Mm.
they're, magnifying, they're amplifying their skill set. So that was really it. So now for the last uh 4 almost 5 years. I've been out the fire service and doing this full time now, and writing books, because here we are now, and we still have a mental health crisis. We still have an obesity epidemic. We still have all these things, and after the pandemic, it's even worse. We actually regressed. None of these takeaways were really learned. We didn't go, oh, Mother Nature was healing at the beginning of the pandemic. Let's not fuck her up so bad anymore. But they
Mm.
were like, nah, just throw masks and gloves everywhere and, go back to the way you used to do it. So yeah, so it's just kind of trying to be part of that message. Like the same with you, all these great
Yeah.
podcasts, documentaries, books, people that are out there trying to make
The
me more of
tools
a
in your
difference.
toolbox. And like you and I have said, we've picked up and put down different podcasts across our own journey, and we've liked where people are going and what they're doing. And then maybe the elastic band stretched a bit too far and we've drifted away from it. And then, but know that you have those tools. I'm not pretend to think that everybody listens to every episode that we put out. They find the ones they like that relate to them, that are pertinent to them. And then they ignore the rest. You've got a great quote on your website, as Bruce Lee says, absorb what's useful, discard what's useless.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's it. Is that I what I love now. I'm almost 800 episodes. it's an immersive thing. You can dive in, and my first episode, Mitch Dreyer was very badly burned, lost his arm in a bowling alley fire. An amazing human being. He became an adaptive athlete and just such a phenomenon. That's episode one. That's almost 7 years ago now. It's still on there. You can dive in and listen to Mitch, start one and work your way forward. Or you can go on the site, and I have a search function now, and you'd be like, all right, he's been yapping about sleep deprivation. You type in sleep deprivation, it brings up Russell Foster, Kirk Parsley. I mean, all these people that are in that space. So what I like now is people are like, hey, I'm having this issue, and I bet, all right, here's your homework. Listen to this episode and this episode, so I can
Yeah.
actually, send links and because it's overwhelming, 800 episodes. Like, where the hell do I start? Well, what do you want to actually know about first? Let me send you just
That's a
two
really
two
hard
people.
question, isn't it? When people
Yeah,
ask that and you feel like a dick by just saying like, just go and listen to it. But that search function that you've got on there, I find is really, really useful. It's not something we've adopted yet because my brain isn't good enough, but we'll get there.
yeah. I mean, Squarespace is a
I
great website.
know we
Literally was a
spoke
few
about it before
clicks.
we came on. I know I need to redo it. I will redo it. I will get someone else to redo it if they don't want to charge it. Some people, yeah, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Yeah, I know we need to change the website, but no, man,
Well,
yours is great.
let's put this out because I've had people, it was actually earlier, say, hey, if there's any way I can help, let me know. And everyone that said that to me know that I truly appreciate that. But I'm going to flip it around. If there's anyone out there who is good with Squarespace, who is a web developer that enjoys the Firefighter podcast,
Mm,
reach out to Pete. I mean, if you're overwhelmed, which you are with all the roles that you have, and like I said, going overseas with the USAR team, and
mhm.
even the television and extreme sports stuff that you're doing now, the endurance stuff. If there's someone out there that's like, dude, I churn out websites super easily,
I
then
know there's
reach
so many
out and
talented people. We got really lucky with a guy called Adam Bisley, who we've got an app now. It's called the Drill Book app. And that again just came out of as the same guys as yours and mine podcast. It's developed by firefighters for firefighters, and it's training ideas, tips and tricks for getting into the job, loads of drills that are on there, all the stuff that when that really intelligent person, that really resourceful, really experienced person leaves the station, all of their knowledge and stuff goes with them. And you'll remember maybe 20% of the good drills that they used to do, the good scenarios they used to plan. So we developed that library, but it was a project I had in my head for ages. And I was never going to have time to do it. And this guy he's an on-call firefighter, but he works for an IT company and he's like the head manager for all of their IT. And he is just an absolute Gandalf with all of that stuff. And we're not neither of us get paid for it. He just does it out of a passion project. And that's the thing. And you'll know it far better than me. Podcasters don't really make any money. It really is a weird passion project that you just go down. And maybe after X number of years, obviously, you've done very well in spending that time engaging with partners and sponsors and stuff like that. But when people do come to you and go, I'm a professional web designer, give me £2,000, I'll do your website. You're like, dude, what? I fucking
yeah.
know. Yeah,
I've
I'd
had
love
guests
to.
say,
I'd love
like,
to,
I'll
but
come on if you donate, 2,000 to my charity. It's like this is a charity. I
yeah.
managed to find enough money to make sure I can keep the lights on, but that's it. It is a passion
Did
project. And
you
so
um did you have to contribute to the Fire Angels? I saw that you had them on recently. Oh,
no,
have
because I
to.
mean, this is the thing is that, I want to share people's stories.
Yeah,
And I hope that, the thousands of people that listen to this,
yeah.
some of them are going to go, that sounds amazing. Let me donate. But as you said, I don't have, if that's the part of the deal to get you on, then it's fine. I respect what you want people to do,
Mm.
but I'm gonna go look somewhere else because, like you said,
I was a
this
pussy. I donated, and then they came up. But what they're doing is great, and they're coming up close to it now because it's been a hell of an endurance journey to get them. I forget how many years ago they first started putting it together because the team has changed significantly. I think they've had two people have changed out. Georgie's the co-founder of it, isn't she? But
yeah,
they
and I think
are.
Bex is still in there too. I know
Yeah,
that.
Bex is still in there. Yeah, Becky Hinchley. She's awesome.
Yeah.
I've seen her Women in the Fire Service a few times. But yeah, they're doing. When do they go off on their adventure now? I'm just trying to. I
In
probably should have
November,
brought this
because
up at
I
the
might
time.
be in Antarctica at the same time. The round the world
No
thing I did with my
way.
mates.
What the
We
fuck
never
are you
got
doing
to
over there?
Antarctica to finish off that last bit. So the documentary supposedly, I say supposedly, the documentary is in motion, but the way that we will want to do it is that we will get to that one continent that we didn't just weren't able to get to because of red tape and everything on the original journey. So that will be kind of like the last episode of us actually getting to Antarctica. But it's literally the same time that they're going to be there. Now, I don't know if I'll see them because they're probably heading off to the South Pole by
I
that
hear it's
point.
a big place.
Yeah, very white from what I heard.
But no, yeah, they're doing some 1,100 kilometers from coast to the Antarctica, South Pole to in November 2023. Yeah, that's going to be, and they're pulling 85 kilo sleds each. But yeah, give us the whistle stop tour, sorry, because I know that's why you're obviously in London supporting, and that must have been a whole logistical nightmare as well. Give people the background on the piece of work you've been part of now for quite some time, really. And again, it's a side project, but it's a bit of a beast.
Yeah, well, I mean that ties in as well. So the number of people that come on the show that have nonprofits, I just wouldn't be able to, contribute to every single one. So I just pick a few that I actually, support. And this one is a friend of mine, Ryan Parrott, who was a Navy SEAL, was blown out of a Humvee by an IED himself, but didn't have any like horrific burns or anything. Definitely had TBI. But when he transitioned out of the military, he met a soldier who was very, very badly burned. And in the conversation, it said, is this the best that they can do for you, the VA? Because he was very badly scarred and disfigured. And he said, well, they told me this was all they could do. And so he said, well, that's bullshit. So he started a nonprofit, and it finds the best plastic surgeons in the US and joins them, connects them with these burn injured military and first responders. So there's a lot of firefighters that have gone through his nonprofit, and
Yeah.
just an amazing human being. Well, his sniper partner, David Metcalf, took his own life a few years ago. I think it was 2019. And so again, Ryan was like, well, it really jarred him. I was like, okay, this is what I need to do now. So Sons of the Flag was already up and running, which was his burn charity. So he focused on this next one called the Human Performance Project, which is looking at the whole holistic human being and looking at mental health through, not only the psychology side, but also, fitness, nutrition, I mean, all these areas, community. And so he wanted to basically simulate what happens to a firefighter on Grenfell or, if Royal Marine in Fallujah, like a high up tempo mental and physical breakdown event that we all go through, and in a more of acute, small scale to simulate the build up for and then observe the breakdown and then what tools can we use to put this person back together again. So the breakdown event, we went around the world and the goal was to do a skydive, run a marathon, and then swim in 7 continents in 7 days. Now the Antarctica one, a lot of red tape and just
Yeah.
shadiness going on. That didn't
Yeah.
happen. So we ended up in South Africa was the first stop. They didn't swim and skydive in every single one. They ran in every single one, but there was one, I think it was Perth was too windy to skydive, and then the swim was an immersion. It depended on what was around at the time.
Mhm.
But the real thing was obviously the travel, the sleep deprivation, and then the physical thing of running a marathon.
Mhm.
So there was one amazing story in Colombia. We got there and talking about COVID, they were asking for vaccination certificates. So,
Oh.
those of us that had them, we handed them in, and there's a group that didn't. Well, it turns out that they had, like the rest of the world, got rid of restrictions, and then someone in the government said, "Wait a second, we were making more money when those restrictions were there." They put the restrictions back, so
Oh.
part of our team were not allowed to go into Cartagena for the day to do their part. So we went into Cartagena. I actually got to do some pretty fun stuff, shoot guns with Green Berets and all kinds of stuff. But the runners went and ran, and there was about there was three runners that were held in the airport, basically in the secure, not gone through customs area. So they ended up sending three treadmills. They bought three crappy home gym treadmills, sent them to the airport, and three of my teammates ran a full marathon staring at a wall
Oh
on a
God.
home treadmill to make sure they got it done. So it
Wow.
was amazing watching the tribe that
Resourcefulness.
was
Love it.
formed, because half of these people were business people that kind of funded it. They paid
Yeah.
for a seat, which helped fund the journey, and the family that was built with all these men and women. The physical breakdown, the mental breakdowns. I witnessed sleep deprivation in a few days. By the time I met Lee in London, um, Lee and David as well, I was so cross-eyed I couldn't even think straight. I wrote they brought their books and I signed their books and put the wrong name in the wrong book. I mean, I was just all over the place. And so yeah, it was amazing. And then when everyone left, another huge takeaway, and I actually did a speech in Colombia about this to everyone. I'm like, hey, in a couple of days, we're going to be heading off back to our respective homes. We have built such a bond. This simulates when you transition out the fire service or the military.
Yeah.
You had purpose, you had tribe, you had, all these positive things, and then you're gonna just gonna be back. Sure
Mm.
as shit. A few days after, I got all these messages like, "Oh my God, you were right." And so it simulated it beautifully.
Mm.
So there is going to be a manual, which would be all the takeaways from more of the actionable things, nutrition, exercise, rehabilitation tools like, blood flow restriction and compression pants and all these things that they've learned. But then there's going to be a documentary that hopefully a docu-series that will highlight because some of these humans had amazing breakthroughs. One of my friends, Dukes, who's one of the best base jumpers in the world, was battling addiction right before this came up. And that was the thing. That was the purpose. That was the thing for him to train for. And he got completely clean. He trained, I think he'd only run 6 miles. He ran a marathon day one when we got there, almost destroyed him, like physically and mentally.
Mm.
And then by day 7, he ran the last day full marathon as well. And he ran, I think, a half the other days. So just, I mean, you probably saw it on the SAS show. Some of these backstories and these people's emotional
Mm.
journeys was incredible. So if you want to learn more about it, it's the actual shiny object around the world thing has happened. We got to do some crazy shit like skydive out of a Russian helicopter over the pyramids and all kinds of stuff. But
Hell.
it's called the Human Performance Project. AmericanExtreme.com is the actual
I was
website.
going to say
But
AmericanExtreme.com, or you can follow Birdman on social media as well. But we'll drop the link for AmericanExtreme.com because hopefully, because I know they've got the stuff in there about the team, the charity, the beneficiaries, and the partners for human performance on there. But that was a massive project, mate. But again, being able, casting your mind back, being able to keep doing the thing that you do, both of us from the world of podcast will know how much prep you'll have had to do for that and ensuring you've got stuff going out, and there's like a massive amount of work you've got to do pre-adventure to keep the wheel turning.
yeah, there was a lot before. I was in a pretty good place. I pre-slept well. I wasn't drinking the leading up to it. But when I got back, the mistakes I made, scheduling and some of those things, the impact of the sleep deprivation was mind blowing. But what I remember as well, I got to choose. I was lucky enough to choose the two charity recipients that down the road, when this manual is made and this documentary is made, all the proceeds from those are going to be split between. I think there's charities in the UK, the US, and Australia. It's going to be allied nations that we were in. The Firefighters charity is one of them, and then Royal British Legion Industries, which I
Oh,
didn't even know the difference, but they're the ones that actually have, they
mm.
get homeless vets off the street, they have housing, they have job creation, they have, they send people to addiction
The
counseling. I
real
mean, all these
cheeky
amazing
difference that
tools.
they've done there, because it is those ones that do that work and they both float under the same name.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So yeah, and then obviously wrote that the firefighters charity. When
Yeah.
I was learning a lot with Ruth, and then there was a change of guard, but amazing, amazing what they do. We don't have that here. Like when I leave the fire service, I have zero. I mean, I have now nothing, no pension, no benefits, zero. So all the mental and physical injuries that I took with me, you're on your own. So to have what you guys have and to have the preventative care and the ability to take a week, which I know you did, to kind of reset and
Mhm.
the physical
Yeah.
rehab side, the mental rehab side. I mean, it's phenomenal. So I'm really excited when these finally go out that we can actually support my beloved people in the UK, which is obviously where I'm from as well. Still very proud to be from there.
They're on my list. I need to get back to them actually, because talking to them about this row in January as well. It's like you'll know it far better than me. You have to do the whole conversation every time, and that sounds so horrible and so elitist and like you don't care. But you've got to have 100 conversations just to get to the decision makers and get the thing in place and get the support. And yeah, people don't realize, even like with the 7X project, just the amount of logistics and planning that go into something like that. And it sounds like well, don't do it if you don't want to do it then. No, you do want to do it, but doing the thing is sometimes the easiest part of the thing. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's everything that goes into it. And even afterwards, creating a documentary about it and all that sort of stuff. God, I wouldn't want that on my plate. It's an amazing thing to do, but what a colossal piece of work that's going to be.
Yeah, and even financially, Ryan, the financial burden that Ryan took, because I don't know if you've been exposed to this, people that listen that have nonprofits probably have.
Mm.
there's a lot of people that will publicly say, we're supporting X, Y, or Z, and when it comes time to actually write the check, they're nowhere to be found. And even like I
Yeah,
said, we haven't given money to those charities yet because the money was always in the film and the book, which is always, was known right up front that it was going to be a few months later.
yeah.
But this is it. There's a lot of what do they call it, virtue signaling. Have I got
Virtue
that right?
signaling. Yeah,
Where people want to be seen to do good things, but when the rubber meets the road, it's only the people that actually mean it that are standing around.
yeah.
So he sank a lot of his own money, a lot into this to make it happen as well. So
We
I'm
had
excited when we get support on the back end.
was it Paul Mitchelson? I think was the guy we spoke to. He was the guy. I think you may have had him. No, I don't think you've had him on yet, have you? He
I don't recognize that name.
oh, let me pull it up. I don't know if you ever have this. I keep having this now where I have that brain fart. I said it to you earlier.
Yeah, no, I have it less, but I used to all the time. And like I said, after
You prep better than me as well, though. That's the difference.
I try to, but not always. There's times where, I don't realize that a podcast has snuck up on me and I'm like, God, I know nothing about this person. I'll be there like 10 minutes before,
Yeah.
like Googling. And that's the good thing though, is you probably find is the more you do this, the better you get
Mhm.
to actually have a great conversation with little information. But it's a little bit more like discovery when you're really well prepared. You lead people through, hey, when you were 20, this happened. Oh, tell me more about that.
You can come into
But
it, sometimes you come into it fresher as well if you haven't burdened your mind with all the information that you think you need to prepare. Sometimes
yeah,
they can accidentally turn into the better ones.
yeah, I over prepared for Jocko the first time,
Did you?
hands down. I just learned too much about him, and it was, yeah, I think I was trying to ask new things from what all the other ones he'd been on, which left, very narrow conversations. So
I didn't find him. That's bad, isn't it? Fair enough. Paul, one of the guys that we had on a podcast previously, he ran around the UK trying to, well, not trying to, raising money because 11 of his previous comrades had taken their lives. So he started his charity. And the reason I say it is because when he got into the realm of charities, he understood what a quagmire that is and how different charities register themselves and what actually distinguishes itself as a non-profit charity and what's a for-profit. And he wanted to do it well. That's why he avoided aligning with anybody else, because it is such a thing that when people start giving money to something and you realize you've not set it up in the right way, it really would have flown hard into the mind of his own sort of personal values and personal morals. But I think so many of us fall foul of that because we don't really have an understanding of it. Heads Up Charity, I think is what it calls. Yeah, Heads Up, that was it. 191 marathons in 218 days. Paul Minter was the guy because he did 18 years of the British Army, reconnaissance soldier. Note him down; he might be a great one for you. But he was blown up by a rocket propelled grenade with an improvised explosive device, and it was the 1st of March 2022 that he started his Heads Up charity and ran around all the coastlines, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. But it said it took him ages to set up the Head Up charity just because he wanted to do it right and he didn't understand the colossal amount of time that would take. But that's a wonderful organization that would probably be worth you speaking to him about at some point.
yeah, I just had Paul Harris, who was known as the Warrior Walker. He just hiked around the whole, mainland Britain, and he even went on to Isle of Wight, some of the other outlying islands too. But that was really cool. I mean, he had such a, again, kind of like a Forrest Gump experience, where
Yeah.
he began because that was someone had just said you should just walk, and he just did. He just didn't say no. He just went to it, and then the journey that he had, and the amazing humans, and the charity that he received because he kind of posted where he was going to be on each leg on Instagram. It was incredible, absolutely incredible.
Course is the
So
same. It says, you stay with the most random people when they know you've actually started and you've committed to it. It took him 191 days or whatever, or 218 days to run out on marathons. And he stayed with farmers, members of the government, firefighters, stations, police officers, army barracks. And when people see that you are what you say you are, it's astonishing what comes out of the woodwork, isn't it?
well, I think as well, it shows you how good most human beings are. And sadly, when you turn on the news, especially during the pandemic, everyone's just hating on each other. Everyone, again, that's a generalization. The people that are given the screen time, especially in America,
Mm.
everyone when I go home, they're like, "Oh my God, Donald Trump." They're like, "Really? 300 wait, like 40 million people, and you're focusing on that orange narcissistic shitbag,
Yeah.
or our current, complete incompetent geriatric that we've got, or you're one that can't even brush his fucking hair no matter leave the country and lie about Christmas parties. You know what I mean?
They
So
say
these
you
are the
get what you
people that,
deserve, don't they?
yeah, but I mean, and it's a shame because if that's all you see, you don't see the beautiful kindness and compassion that I think exists all over the UK. And I was actually making a comment to my family. I just went home to Portugal and I went through the UK and actually interacted with some British people when I was there.
Mm.
And there was like some really rude shit from older people. And I'm like, is this is what
Oh,
happened? Like it's even permeated into the, what we consider like British manners. And,
yeah.
so I think this is what we have to refine is show everyone how beautiful most British people are. And by the two Paul's individual stories and,
Mm.
Leon Logothetis, the Kindness Diaries, and all these different kind of, even like David Attenborough, just how beautiful this planet is that we inhabit, and
Mm.
how we need to pick our heads up and stop deforestation and all
Who's
these
going to be
things.
the
And
next David Attenborough? That's
I
the
don't know. I'm
question.
still trying to get him on. My sister actually works for the BBC as an editor, so
Oh, mate, how
it's
colossal
a
would that
once
be?
in a million, one in a million shot. But if not him, then again, these are some of the guests I want to get on too, because there's so much wisdom in the animal kingdom, and we're
Mm.
so arrogant as a species, especially modern day human beings, when we look at, tribalism and community and caring and compassion of some species of different animals and conservation and, all these things that we talked about, that colony, that tribe, that working together. I mean, imagine picking David Attenborough's mind for a couple of hours of all the things that he's learned and all the examples. Well, there's this antelope that does this, humans would, should learn from, or this is actually what we're doing. There's this smoke and mirrors with the whole ozone thing, but this is what I've seen over my career. And this far supersedes what would be a natural warming of the planet, whatever it is,
Yeah.
to listen to him basically impart 80 plus years of wisdom through his eyes would be phenomenal. These are the voices I want to hear. I don't give a shit about a documentary on airports and you spend an hour watching people argue over their lost luggage. I want to spend an hour seeing the beautiful human beings, not the worst of mankind.
Who was it that Joe Rogan just had on? Who's done the documentary, the Netflix documentary on the chimps? And I forget. Oh, I can't even remember now. That was fascinating. I need to. I still want to go and look at the actual study that they're talking about because the episode that he just did is a guy called James Reed, and he's a filmmaker. He does things like he did something called The Octopus Teacher years and years ago, but he's just done or he's just been in charge of the Chimp Empire, which is streaming on Netflix. And again, it talks about all of those human behaviors and pack animals, and it's like the chimps that they study of the largest pack of chimps in the world or something like that, and looking at the hierarchies because we're not too complex from them, really, in my personal opinion. I remember somebody saying to me recently that we just need more water and sunlight. That's all most people need in their life. They said we're basically plants with complex emotional problems. If we just
Yeah,
go
it's
back to our
absolutely.
primitive roots, we're not too complex as that we like to think we are, and we're not very different from the animals we surround ourselves with.
I had a guy I worked with, another firefighter, in like two departments ago. Um, and he was a mixed race guy, kind of Asian and like Hispanic heritage. And one of these guys that, in his opinion, everyone was racist. Everything was racist, all white people. And we're talking about evolution. And I said, yeah, I truly believe that, there was a genesis from early mammal to chimp to human. And he's like, that's so racist. And I'm like, dude, I'm talking about all of us,
Fuck.
every one of us. Like, and then to me, if you look at a chimp, I see an old white dude in a chimp. You look at a gorilla, you see the musculature maybe of some of the African nations that become these freaking giant human beings. You look at the orangutan and you start to see some of the Asian features. That's just me. Everyone can entitle, but that's not racist. That's evolution, that people adapt and overcome. And I think that, as you move forward, you move to different climates, you have someone who randomly has a slightly larger brain and it starts to evolve and think a little differently and start creating tools
Mm.
that there can be this, this amazing evolution. So if you buy into that, we still have that monkey in us.
That's it. It's just the geographical lottery because it's about the melanin in the skin, isn't it? It's the amount of UV exposure and the amount of melanin you develop in your skin changes the pigmentation of it. And that's ultimately where this whole role and racial variation has come from in the colors of our skin. It's just a geographical thing. That's all it is. Yet it's become such a colossal divide in the entire global, society. When really it was, from my limited interpretation and listening to the Hubermans of the world and people like that, it was just a geographical lottery as to the type of skin and UV exposure and melanin that you develop.
Well,
But
one observation someone said recently, one of the guests on the show, I thought this was so like simply profound. It wasn't, deep and meaningful. It was just right in our face. He said, imagine, medieval England and the lord and the lady are looking over the castle walls and they get people to argue amongst each other. He goes, what are those peasants not thinking about? Storming the castle. And you
yeah,
look in time, slavery, for example, most British people were in the deepest level of poverty in quite a lot of British history during the time of slavery.
yeah,
Not every white person was gaining from slavery in America. The blacksmith
fuck
in
no,
Midwest was just shoeing horses. He wasn't, gaining
mm,
from it. It's always a few tyrants that
yeah,
gain off the masses. It was the few tyrants that were telling the UK to hide in their house while
mm,
they were having Christmas parties.
yeah,
It's over and over again, and some are worse than others. I mean, a few tyrants in Germany caused mass genocide and duped a lot of the German people. So over and over again this happens, and this is a problem. We're being divided
mm-hmm.
because it stops us from looking the direction we all need to stand shoulder to shoulder and look and be like, why the fuck are you in this position? You've done a horrible job. You should never have been here. Our system is broken. We're
Yeah,
going to unite and actually put real leaders in our country that are going to bring us together. Because there's one simple truth. If your leader has divided you, they're not a leader. And if there's a virus sweeping through and killing people, if your country was brought together, like I would argue, for example, Sweden probably was, then that's a leader. If your country was divided, that's the opposite of a leader. That's a tyrant.
mate, that is bang on the money. I love that. I've never heard you say about, the simplicity of what you guys said there, but that bit there, if the leader is dividing you, they're not a leader. That is so very true. And it screams back, you'd say about the Germans or whatever, it goes all the way back to Roman times when you think, well, I mean, what is it in the Gladiator film? Entertain the horde and they will love you forever. So that's why they did the Colosseum and that's why they did the games, just to entertain the masses, just to please the horde, and stop them looking at what else is going on and stop them storming the castle. I wanted to echo back just before we close and bring it back to page one of your of your website, because, and we'll say it again from Bruce Lee, absorb what's useful, discard what is useless. So from the now nearly 700 podcast episodes that you've done, what are the pivots? What are the 1,001%ers, marginal gains, changes and variations or similarities perhaps that you've seen in the guests? And what are the things that you keep taking forward into your new conversations as, effectively a professional communicator now? Whilst I know you probably wouldn't say yourself that it is effectively what you do now. What do you take forward, and what are maybe those things that you'd encourage other people to consider as we look at all the things we've spoken about there? Getting rid of those divides, encouraging leaders that bring us together. As a communicator, that's effectively what you do.
I think one of the big things that, I kind of had an aha moment on for me is we look at evolution as technology these days. Oh, it's amazing. I mean, what we're doing now is incredible. We're 3,000 miles away from each other and we're having this video chat, and then it's going to be disseminated all over the planet, and anyone with a Wi-Fi connection can access this conversation.
Yeah.
Amazing. But we focus on that, and yet there's so many elements of technology that have been so negative, whether it's, the number of people you can kill in a war now, whether it's dissemination of propaganda, et cetera, et cetera. What I really feel is one of the biggest truths is, to me, the evolution of man, and I mean that man and woman and whatever else you identify,
Yeah.
is kindness and compassion. There were some very, very barbaric times in the past in human history. And so by unifying the people and trying to minimize, you never eliminate, but minimize a lot of this pigeonholing and division, that is the first thing. If we can finally learn from history that when these tyrannical people start to try and climb the ladder, we just, kick the ladder from under them and get them back down again. That's a big truth. From
Yeah.
the health perspective, you and I were groomed that this is how men are. Suck it
Mm.
up, rub some dirt in it. We were groomed that to be, to eat, you need to have boiled chicken breast and bowls of pasta, and
Yeah.
then to work out, you got to go pec deck and preach a
Yeah.
curl and all that bullshit. So basically, almost everything we were taught was absolute bullshit. So a lot of our generation has to reverse engineer the things that were wrong, and to add something to that, the phrase we did did the best with the tools that we had is true. That's what a lot of people were being told. So it's not saying, oh, everyone was so stupid. The opposite. But now we know strength and conditioning that's completely different. We understand nutrition a little bit more. So
Mm.
now it's pushing back to 100 years ago. 100 years ago, school was more about, I would like to think just before the kind of industrial revolution, school was a place where children would actually learn and read
Mm.
books and play and interact. And we got away from that. We ended up going into grooming people for factories.
Mm.
100 years ago, there were no pesticides, there were no hormones and antibiotics in our meat. It was, it ate off the land or it grew in the land. You picked it, you slaughtered it if you were a meat eater, and then you ate those holistic things. You moved a lot. You didn't sit. You were
Mm.
working with your hands. There were people that, yeah, of course, that were bookkeepers and everything that didn't do as much. But the average person, even to get to your bookkeeping shop, probably walked, probably had to carry food, vegetables, etc. Maybe had to work in their own garden. So for me, the biggest truths are take the beautiful things about technology that have given us progress. I do not want to have surgery without anesthetic. I'm
Yeah.
all about, the right
I'm
pharmaceuticals,
not just going to
chronic
fucking
dis
Goggins it. I do want the anesthetic.
exactly. But chronic disease management, hypertension, obesity, heart disease, etc., there's so much you can reverse with nutrition, exercise, etc. So I think the big takeaway is actually if we can just roll the clock back 100 years and don't be so arrogant to think that, oh, back in the old days they were, so behind and so primitive, and actually realize, okay, there's a reason that acupuncture has been around for thousands of years. There's a reason why, you know, not growing monocrops on a field
Mm.
was sustainable. You grow this and then the pigs come through, or the cows, and you rotate through your pastures. I mean, all these things. So to me, it's having the humility to go back in time and match what was done 100 years ago to now. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, don't throw your shit out of a window onto the streets of London. You're probably gonna have a cholera outbreak, So disregard some of the things we did wrong, but just go back to the basics, the fundamentals of, try and as closely as you can get to sleep at night, turn off
Yes.
devices, have low light, and then look as a fire service and say, okay, if we're going to ask our men and women, firefighters, police officers, doctors, nurses, to be awake all night, that needs to be understood as the incredible toll of sleep deprivation on the human body.
Mm.
We've got to give them much longer to recover.
Yeah.
We have to be awake. Someone's got to go to that structure fire when everyone else is safe in their bed, or
Mm.
that burglar. But you have to understand the negative effect. And then if it's not deemed necessary, stop making people stock shelves all night or work in a factory, or
Yeah.
it's not that fucking important. We
Hmm.
have robots, we have, all these things.
Mm.
Understanding that sleep is imperative. And if so many of my guests have said, if without sleep, nutrition, exercise, all these things, they're almost null and void.
It's the
Sleep
big
is the
performance
most
enhancement.
paramount thing.
Yeah.
So
You just
those are
can't
some of
sell
the
it.
truths. No, no. So that'll be my kind of, mic drop as far as 800 episodes so far.
James, yeah, so two things. One, I freaking love you. Two, obviously, everybody, jamesgeering.com, Behind the Shield podcast. And of course, we've not even gone into it, but that also leads me into the second excitement, which is when you do come out with your next book, which again, this little bit of social accountability. Obviously, One More Light is out there, the life, death, and humanity through the eyes of a firefighter. You've also got the audiobook version. We'll took the notes for that in the podcast for this, but when you do get there ready with your next one, because we've done 2 hours, 45 minutes now, which I love. And it's felt like 5 minutes. Just the sheer fact that I realized my wife's cut the grass, brought the horses in, and been and picked up my daughter in the period of our conversation made me realize how long we've been going. But I'd love to speak again, my friend, when you're close to where you need to be with the next one as well.
Beautiful. Well, again, I want to say thank you. I mean, we're obviously kindred spirits doing the same thing from each side of the Atlantic. I want to get you back on again because the SAS show, some of the relief work that
I
you
think
guys
I
have
won
done.
this jujitsu, by the way. I
No, you
fucking
did.
won this
You
one.
did.
You went long for me, which is good. I threw the ball and you went with it, which I loved. And it's nice because you're far more interesting than the thing you do, if that makes sense. It sounds harsh and it's no poor reflection on the other people, but we forget as much as it's called behind the shield, you're the one with the soft hand on the tiller steering the ship. So all of the benefits that people get from the guests come through the filter of you. So I also love being able to give that stage and look at the true benefits that have come from the life that's brought you to where you are now.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it because I hide behind the shield all
I
the
know you
time.
do.
But it is so much fun to disseminate because again, as you said, I'm a conduit. I get to disseminate the wisdom that I've learned. They say there is no original wisdom. It's all
Yeah,
passed from generation to
100%.
generation. But I have just listened to so many incredible humans to get to pass that on and critically think about some of the things that most of us deal with and then bring solutions. I mean, you've got, hundreds of people in yours, I've got hundreds of people in mine that people could just, go to that episode and listen. You think that you're a pussy and all right, well, here's an SAS guy who's crying on the show talking about his vulnerability.
Yeah.
There's so many ways that we can directly, without any filter and any restriction, connect person A with expert B. And, as I said, try and do something good with this life and make the world a little better. So I want to thank you so much for having me on.
Cheers, brother. Send my love to the family and we'll speak again soon.
Beautiful.
Firefighters podcast is put together to develop, inspire, and hopefully even motivate those individuals who have chosen to serve our communities and be part of the first responder family. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield. If you have enjoyed today's episode and you want to see the podcast continue, please head over to our Patreon page where you can support the ongoing efforts of the podcast. Please hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on whatever platform you're listening to. Please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.